The stagecoach shattered like kindling. Mara hit the ground hard, dust in her mouth, blood on her hands. Around her, silence. Empty land stretching forever, no help coming. No one who cared if she lived or died. She'd escaped one nightmare only to land in another. Then hoofbeats, a shadow, a man who didn't ask questions. This is where everything changed. Stay with me. Watch this story unfold to the very end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this journey reaches. Now, let me tell you how Mara Calloway stopped running. The wheel came off first. Not gradually, not with warning, but in one violent crack that sent the entire left side of the stagecoach lurching downward. Mara barely had time to brace herself before the second wheel splintered, wood screaming against rock, and the whole contraption pitched sideways like a dying animal. She was thrown clear. The impact knocked the air from her lungs. Dust exploded around her, filling her nose, her eyes, coating her tongue with grit. For several seconds she couldn't breathe, couldn't see, couldn't do anything but lie there gasping while her ribs screamed and her vision swam. When the world finally steadied, Mara pushed herself up on shaking arms. The stagecoach lay on its side 30 feet away, one wheel still spinning lazily in the afternoon sun. The horses were gone, broken free and vanished over the ridge. The driver was nowhere to be seen, probably thrown even farther than she was. She was alone. Completely, utterly alone. Mara sat back on her heels, breathing hard, and looked around. The Wyoming territory stretched in every direction, endless, empty, indifferent. Hills rolled away into pale brown distances under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. No trees, no buildings, no smoke on the horizon. Nothing, just land and sky and the wind that never stopped. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her thighs and forced herself to think. Water, shelter, direction. She had none of those things. The small canvas bag she'd clutched through the entire journey had been ripped from her hands during the crash. She spotted it near the overturned coach, half buried in dust. Mara stumbled to her feet and retrieved it, checking the contents with trembling fingers. One spare dress. A hairbrush. The last $3 she owned. No water. No food. No map. The sun was already past its peak, sliding westward. That meant she had maybe 4 hours of daylight left. After that, Mara shut down that line of thinking before it could spiral. She'd survived worse than this. She'd survived Garrett. She'd survived St. Louis. She'd survive this too. Just keep moving. She chose east because the land sloped gently downward in that direction, and downward sometimes meant water. The bag hung heavy on her shoulder. Her boots, already worn thin from months of use, crunched over stone and scrub grass. The wind pushed at her back like an impatient hand. Walk, breathe, walk, breathe. Don't think about the emptiness. Don't think about what happens when the sun goes down. Don't think about... A sound stopped her cold. Hoofbeats. Mara spun around, heart hammering. For one wild moment she thought the stagecoach horses had returned. But no, this was deliberate. Steady. A single horse moving at an easy pace. A rider appeared over the low ridge behind her. Mara's first instinct was to run. Her second was to reach for a weapon she didn't have. She did neither. Instead, she stood frozen, watching the figure approach, every muscle in her body coiled tight. The rider was a man, tall, lean, sitting his horse with the kind of easy balance that spoke of years in the saddle. He wore dark trousers, a faded blue shirt, a hat pulled low against the sun. As he drew closer, Mara could make out more details. The gun belt at his hip, the bedroll tied behind his saddle, the way his eyes scanned the horizon even as he rode toward her. He stopped about 20 feet away. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Mara lifted her chin. I don't need help. The man's expression didn't change. He looked past her at the wrecked stagecoach, then back at her face. Looks like you might. I can manage. Nearest town is Red Bluff, 30 miles northeast. He gestured vaguely in that direction. You planning to walk it? If I have to. Something that might have been respect flickered across his features. Or maybe it was just the light. Sun'll be down in 4 hours. Temperature drops fast out here at night. You won't make 5 miles before dark. Mara's jaw tightened. She knew he was right, hated that he was right. The man studied her for another moment, then nodded toward his horse. I'm heading that direction anyway. Can give you a ride if you want. Every instinct Mara had screamed no. She didn't know this man. Didn't know what he wanted. Out here, miles from anywhere, she'd be completely at his mercy. But the alternative was dying alone in the dark. She looked at him, really looked. His face was weathered, creased by sun and wind, somewhere in his mid-30s. His hands rested loose on the reins. He hadn't moved closer, hadn't smiled, hadn't tried to charm or cajole or convince. He'd just stated facts and made an offer. "What's your price?" Mara asked. The man's eyebrows rose slightly. "Price?" "For the ride." "What do you want?" Understanding settled into his expression, not pity, exactly, but something adjacent to it, something that made Mara want to hit him. "Nothing," he said quietly. "Just seems like the decent thing to do." Mara laughed, a short, bitter sound. "There's no such thing as decent out here." "Maybe not." He gathered his reins. "But the offer stands. Take it or leave it." He was turning his horse away. Mara's pride warred with her survival instinct. Pride had kept her alive through Garrett's fists and St. Louis's cruelty, but survival had brought her this far. "Wait," she said. The man stopped. Mara picked up her bag and walked forward, each step feeling like defeat and salvation in equal measure. When she reached the horse, the man kicked his foot free from the stirrup and extended his hand. She ignored it and pulled herself up behind him using the saddle. If he was offended, he didn't show it. He just settled back into position and clicked his tongue. The horse started moving, not fast, just a steady walk that ate up the miles without wasting energy. Mara sat stiff behind him, careful not to touch more than necessary. The horse's gait was smooth, hypnotic. The sun warmed her back. Gradually, despite herself, some of the tension leaked out of her shoulders. They rode in silence for what felt like hours. Finally, Mara spoke. "What's your name?" "Ethan Rourke." "Mara Calloway." He nodded, acknowledging this. Another stretch of silence. "What happened to the driver?" Ethan asked. "Don't know. Probably thrown clear like I was. I didn't see him after the crash." "He's likely walking to Red Bluff from the other direction then." "Probably." More silence. The landscape rolled past, unchanging. Mara watched the horizon for any sign of civilization and saw nothing. "You from around here?" Ethan asked. "No." "Passing through?" "Something like that." Ethan didn't push. Mara was grateful for that. Most men would have kept prodding, kept trying to extract information like pulling teeth, but Ethan just rode, apparently content with silence. The sun continued its arc westward. The land softened into longer shadows. Mara's back ached from sitting rigid, but she refused to relax, refused to lean against him even though the temptation grew stronger with every mile. Eventually, Ethan spoke again. "There's a storm coming." Mara looked up. The sky ahead had darkened, not with evening, but with thick clouds rolling in from the north. Even as she watched, lightning flickered deep within them. "How far to Red Bluff?" she asked. "Too far." Ethan adjusted his grip on the reins. "I've got a place about 5 miles south. We can shelter there till it passes." Every alarm bell in Mara's head started ringing. "No." "It's not a request," Ethan said calmly. "That storm's going to hit in less than an hour. We get caught in the open, we're both dead, horse too. I'll take my chances in town. You won't make it." "You don't know that." Ethan twisted in the saddle to look at her directly. His eyes were gray, the same color as the approaching storm. "Yes," he said quietly. "I do." Thunder rumbled across the plain, long and low. Mara's hands clenched into fists. She wanted to argue, wanted to demand he take her to town anyway, wanted to jump off this horse and take her chances on foot. But she wasn't stupid. She could feel the temperature dropping, could see how fast those clouds were moving. She'd die out there. And dying because of pride seemed even more pathetic than trusting a stranger. "Fine," she bit out, "but just until the storm passes." "Wouldn't expect anything else." Ethan turned the horse south. The animal sensed the urgency now, picking up its pace without being told. The wind strengthened, carrying the smell of rain and ozone. Mara's hair whipped around her face. 20 minutes later, a structure emerged from the landscape. Calling it a cabin was generous. It was small, maybe 2 rooms, built from rough-hewn logs and prairie sod. A narrow chimney jutted from the roof. A small corral stood empty beside it, and beyond that, a shed that had seen better days. But it was shelter. Ethan dismounted and helped Mara down. She accepted his hand this time because falling would be worse than contact. He led the horse to the shed while she stood awkwardly near the cabin door, bag clutched tight. The first drops of rain began to fall. Ethan emerged from the shed at a jog and pushed past her to unlock the cabin door. "Get inside." Mara didn't argue. She ducked through the doorway just as the sky opened up. The interior was dark and smelled of wood smoke and leather. Mara stood dripping just inside the threshold while her eyes adjusted. Gradually, shapes resolved. A cast-iron stove in the corner, a rough table with 2 chairs, a single bed covered with wool blankets, shelves holding supplies. 1 room, not 2. 1 bed. Mara's throat tightened. Ethan came in behind her, shaking water from his hat. He moved past her to the stove and began building a fire, apparently unconcerned with her presence. Within minutes, flames crackled to life, throwing warm light across the space. Outside, the storm unleashed itself fully. Rain hammered the roof. Wind shrieked around the corners. Lightning turned the windows white. Mara stood frozen by the door. Ethan hung his hat on a peg and ran a hand through his wet hair. When he turned and saw her still standing there, something shifted in his expression. "You can sit," he said. "I'm not going to hurt you." "I don't know that." "No," he agreed. "You don't." He moved to the shelves and pulled down a tin cup and a bottle of whiskey. He poured a measure into the cup and set it on the table, then backed away and sat in the other chair, putting the table between them. "Warm yourself up," he said. "Storm like this could last hours." Mara looked at the cup, then at Ethan, then at the door. But the door led to certain death in the storm, and the cup was just sitting there, innocent and amber in the firelight. Slowly, she crossed the room and picked it up. The whiskey burned going down, but it spread warmth through her chest and steadied her shaking hands. She set the cup down but didn't sit. "You can take the bed," Ethan said. "I'll sleep on the floor." "I'm not taking your bed." Wasn't asking permission. Mara's eyes narrowed. "I don't need your charity." "It's not charity, it's practical. You're half frozen and exhausted. You need sleep more than I do." He stood and pulled one of the blankets from the bed, spreading it on the floor near the stove. "I've slept in worse places." He said it matter-of-factly, like it was the most natural thing in the world to give up his bed for a stranger who'd done nothing but distrust him for hours. Mara didn't know what to do with that. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. "You needed help." "That's not a reason." "It's the only one I've got." Outside, thunder cracked so loud the walls shook. Mara flinched despite herself. The whiskey was making her lightheaded, or maybe that was just exhaustion finally catching up. Her legs felt unsteady. "Sit down before you fall down," Ethan said. This time, she did. The chair scraped against the wooden floor. Mara wrapped her hands around the empty cup and stared at the table, trying to organize her thoughts into something coherent. "I can't pay you," she said finally. "Didn't ask you to." "I don't—" She stopped, frustrated. "I don't have anything to offer." "I know." "Then why—" "Because you're a human being caught in a bad situation, and I had the ability to help." Ethan's voice was steady, patient. "That's all." Mara looked up at him. In the firelight, his face looked older, more tired. She realized he probably wasn't much older than her, maybe 35 to her 28. But he carried himself with a kind of settled weariness that came from years of hard living. She recognized it because she carried the same thing. "Where are you from?" she asked. "Kansas originally. Been out here about 8 years now." "Why Wyoming?" "Why not Wyoming?" It wasn't an answer, but Mara let it pass. She poured herself another measure of whiskey without asking. "You live alone?" "Yes." "By choice?" Something flickered across Ethan's expression, too quick to read. "By circumstance." Mara knew better than to push. Everyone out here had a past they didn't talk about, hers included. The storm continued to rage. Rain drummed endlessly on the roof. Wind rattled the windows. But inside, the fire kept the cold at bay, and the whiskey dulled the sharp edges of Mara's fear. Eventually, Ethan stood and moved to the shelves again. He pulled down a tin of beans and some hardtack, setting them on the table. You should eat something. I'm not hungry. Eat anyway. He heated the beans on the stove while Mara sat and watched. There was something mesmerizing about the simple domesticity of it, the careful way he stirred the pot, the economical movements, the lack of wasted effort. When the beans were ready, he divided them between two plates and set one in front of her. Then he sat in the other chair and began eating without ceremony. Mara picked up her fork. The beans were plain, just beans and a little salt, but they were hot and filling. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until the first bite hit her stomach. They ate in silence. Afterward, Ethan cleaned the dishes while Mara sat by the fire, fighting to keep her eyes open. The warmth, the food, the whiskey. Everything was conspiring to drag her under. You should sleep, Ethan said. What time is it? Late enough. Mara looked at the bed, then at Ethan. I know. He settled onto his blanket on the floor, back against the wall. But you're safe here. I give you my word. A man's word. Mara had learned the value of that in St. Louis, in Garrett's house, in a dozen places before that, but she was also so tired she could barely keep her head up. If you touch me, she said quietly, I will kill you. Ethan's expression didn't change. Understood. Mara stood on shaking legs and crossed to the bed. She didn't undress, just pulled off her boots and lay down fully clothed on top of the blankets. The mattress was thin but clean, the pillow smelled like wood smoke. She kept her back to the room, one hand tucked under the pillow where she could grab it if needed. Behind her, she heard Ethan shift on his blanket. The fire crackled, rain drummed on. Mara waited for footsteps, for the creak of floorboards, for hands reaching through the dark. None came. Gradually, despite everything, exhaustion pulled her under. She woke to silence. For a moment, Mara couldn't remember where she was. Then it all came back. The crash, the storm, Ethan. She sat up quickly, heart pounding. Morning light filtered through the windows. The storm had passed. The cabin was empty. Panic flared hot in her chest. She swung her legs off the bed and grabbed her boots, pulling them on with shaking hands. Where was he? What was he? The door opened. Ethan stepped inside, carrying an armload of firewood. He paused when he saw her awake, then continued to the stove and began stacking the wood beside it. Morning, he said. Mara's throat felt tight. Morning. There's coffee on the stove. Should still be hot. She looked and saw a pot sitting on the cast iron, steam rising from the spout. On the table sat a plate with biscuits and bacon. You let me sleep, she said. You needed it. You could have. She stopped. Ethan straightened and looked at her directly. I could have done a lot of things. I didn't. Won't. Clear? Mara nodded slowly. He turned back to his work. Storm's passed. Should be able to make Red Bluff by afternoon if we leave soon. Right. Mara stood, brushing off her dress self-consciously. I'll be ready. She poured herself coffee and ate standing up, too restless to sit. The biscuits were surprisingly good, buttery and light. The bacon was crisp. Ethan must have been up for hours preparing all this. When she finished, she washed her plate and cup without being asked, then gathered her few belongings. Ethan had already saddled his horse and was waiting outside when she emerged. The land looked scrubbed clean by the storm. Water stood in shallow pools, reflecting the morning sky. The air smelled fresh and alive. Ethan helped her mount, then swung up in front of her. They set off northeast at a steady pace. After an hour of riding, buildings appeared on the horizon. Red Bluff wasn't much. Maybe 24 structures clustered around a main street. But it was civilization. It was people. It was somewhere Mara could disappear and start over. Ethan rode straight to what looked like a boarding house and stopped. Mrs. Chen runs a clean place. Meals included. Fair prices. Mara slid off the horse and stood looking up at him, words stuck in her throat. Thank you, she finally managed. Ethan touched the brim of his hat. Good luck, Miss Calloway. He was turning to leave. Wait, Mara said. He paused. What you did... She stopped, frustrated by her inability to articulate what she meant. Most men wouldn't have. I'm not most men. No, Mara agreed quietly. You're not. Something passed between them in that moment. Understanding, maybe. Recognition. Two people who'd been broken by the world in different ways but had somehow remained standing. Then Ethan clicked his tongue and rode away. Mara watched until he disappeared around a corner, then turned to face the boarding house. A new start. Again. She could do this. She'd done it before. She climbed the steps and knocked on the door. Mrs. Chen was a small, formidable woman who took one look at Mara's dusty dress and disheveled appearance and quoted a price for the week. When Mara counted out the last of her money, Mrs. Chen's expression softened slightly. "You'll need work," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "Can you sew?" "Yes." "Cook?" "Well enough." Mrs. Chen nodded. "Miller's wife just had twins. She needs help with the other children. Pays not much, but it's steady." She pointed down the street. "Blue house, 3 blocks that way." Mara felt something loosen in her chest. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. Wait till you meet the Miller children." But there was a hint of warmth in Mrs. Chen's stern expression. "Rooms upstairs, second on the left. Meals at 6 and 7. You're late, you don't eat." "Understood." Mara's room was barely large enough for a narrow bed and a small dresser, but it was clean and the lock on the door worked. She sat on the bed and allowed herself exactly 3 minutes of trembling relief. Then she unpacked her few belongings, washed her face in the basin, and went to find the blue house. The Miller family was chaos incarnate. 4 children under the age of 8, all seemingly in motion at once, plus newborn twins who took turns screaming. Mrs. Miller looked like she hadn't slept in weeks. When Mara introduced herself, the woman nearly wept with gratitude. "Can you start today?" she asked desperately. "Right now, if you need me." What followed was the longest afternoon of Mara's life. She wrangled children, changed diapers, prepared meals, scrubbed floors, and somehow kept everyone alive until Mr. Miller came home from his job at the general store. When he saw his house in order and his wife actually sitting down, he looked at Mara like she'd performed a miracle. "You'll come back tomorrow?" Mrs. Miller asked, clutching Mara's hand. "Every day you need me." Walking back to the boarding house through the evening streets, Mara felt the weight of the day settle into her bones. She was exhausted. Her back ached. Her hands were raw from scrubbing, but she'd earned today, every penny of it. At dinner, Mrs. Chen served beef stew that was better than anything Mara had eaten in months. She sat with the other boarders, a telegraph operator, a clerk from the land office, a school teacher, and let their conversation wash over her without really listening. Afterward, she climbed the stairs to her room, locked the door, and fell onto the bed still fully dressed. Tomorrow would be the same, and the day after that, and the day after that. This was her life now, small, hard, honest. It would have to be enough. Days turned into weeks. Mara fell into a routine. Wake before dawn, help Mrs. Chen with breakfast, walk to the Miller house, wrangle children until evening, walk back, eat dinner, collapse into bed. Repeat. The work was relentless, but Mara found she didn't mind. There was a strange comfort in the exhaustion. It left no room for thinking about the past, about Garrett, about St. Louis, about the long road of bad choices that had led her here. The Miller children gradually warmed to her. Even the twins seemed to cry less when she held them. Mrs. Miller started smiling again. Mr. Miller gave Mara a raise without her asking. Red Bluff itself was typical of frontier towns, rough, pragmatic, occasionally violent. Mara learned which saloons to avoid, which streets were safe after dark, which men to steer clear of. She kept her head down, did her work, and bothered no one. She didn't think about Ethan Rourke. She told herself she didn't. But sometimes, walking back from the Miller house in the long summer evenings, she'd see a lone rider on the horizon, and her heart would stutter before logic reasserted itself. Wyoming was full of lone riders. It didn't mean anything. 6 weeks after arriving in Red Bluff, Mara had saved enough to buy a new dress. Nothing fancy, just sturdy cotton in a dark blue that wouldn't show stains. But it was hers, purchased with money she'd earned herself, and when she put it on, she barely recognized the woman in Mrs. Chen's small mirror. She looked stable, settled, like someone who belonged somewhere. It was a strange feeling. That afternoon, Mrs. Miller sent her to the general store for supplies. Mara was studying a list and trying to calculate costs when someone spoke behind her. "Miss Calloway." She knew the voice before she turned around. Ethan Rourke stood 3 feet away, hat in hand, looking exactly as he had 6 weeks ago, except maybe slightly more weathered. His eyes met hers, steady and gray. "Mr. Rourke," Mara managed. "Didn't expect to see you still in town." "Didn't expect to still be here." An awkward silence stretched between them. The store clerk was watching with poorly concealed interest. "You're looking well," Ethan said finally. "I'm working. For the Millers." "Good family." "Yes." More silence. Mara's heart was beating faster than it should, and she didn't know why. This was just a polite conversation with someone who'd helped her once. That was all. "How's your place?" she asked, just to say something. "Still standing." A hint of humor touched his expression. "Fixed the roof last week." "The storm didn't damage it?" "Nothing I couldn't repair." Mara nodded, ran out of things to say, started to turn back to her shopping. "Miss Calloway." She stopped. Ethan seemed to be choosing his words carefully. "There's a church social next Sunday. Not much, just food and music. But if you were inclined to go, I'd be honored to escort you." Every wall Mara had built slammed into place. "No." "I understand." "You don't." She kept her voice low, conscious of the clerk's ears. "I'm not looking for that." "What is that?" "You know what?" Ethan's expression remained neutral. "I was just offering to walk you to a social gathering, Miss Calloway, not proposing marriage." Heat rushed to Mara's face. "I know that." "Do you?" She glared at him. "I've been very clear about not needing help, yes. I heard you the first dozen times." Ethan's voice was mild, but something harder ran underneath. "But maybe what I'm offering isn't help. Maybe it's just company." "I don't need company either." "Everyone needs company." "Not me." "Especially you." The words hung in the air between them. Mara felt her jaw clench. "You don't know anything about me." "I know you've been hurt." Ethan's eyes were too knowing, too gentle. "I know you're scared. And I know you're one of the strongest people I've ever met. But strength doesn't mean you have to be alone." Mara's throat felt tight. "I said no." Ethan nodded slowly. He didn't look angry or offended, just resigned. "All right. I apologize for presuming." He put his hat back on and turned to leave. Mara watched him go, her hands clenched around Mrs. Miller's shopping list so hard the paper crumpled. The clerk cleared his throat. "That was Ethan Rourke." "I know who it was." "Good man, honest, keeps to himself mostly." Mara didn't respond. "Doesn't ask ladies to socials often, or ever, actually." "I'm not interested in gossip." The clerk shrugged and went back to his ledger. Mara finished her shopping in silence, paid, and left. But walking back to the Miller house, she couldn't stop thinking about Ethan's expression when she'd turned him down. Not hurt, not angry, just accepting. Like he'd expected rejection, but had asked anyway. That bothered her more than she wanted to admit. Sunday came. Mara didn't go to the social. She told herself it was because she needed to rest, to catch up on mending, to prepare for the week ahead. She told herself she had no interest in church gatherings or small-town entertainment. But Sunday evening, lying in her bed and listening to distant music drifting from the church, she wondered if she'd made a mistake. Not about Ethan specifically, just about everything. The next morning, she threw herself back into work with renewed determination. Children to mind, meals to prepare, floors to scrub, no time for wondering, no time for regret. But Red Bluff was a small town, and paths crossed whether you wanted them to or not. She saw Ethan at the general store again 2 weeks later. He tipped his hat politely and said, "Ma'am," and moved on without stopping to talk. She saw him at the feed store a week after that. Same polite greeting, same careful distance. It was exactly what she'd wanted. So why did it feel wrong? Late summer bled into early fall. The air turned crisp in the evenings. Mara's routine continued unchanged. Work, eat, sleep, repeat. She'd saved enough money now that she could probably rent a small place of her own. But Mrs. Chen's boarding house was comfortable and convenient. Besides, what would she do with more space? September brought cooler weather and the first hints of color in the distant hills. The Miller children started school. Mrs. Miller's twins were sleeping through the night. Everything was settling into a comfortable pattern. Mara should have been content. She wasn't. Something restless had woken inside her, something she couldn't quite name or understand. She found herself staring out windows at the open land beyond town, wondering what lay past those hills. One evening, Mrs. Chen joined her on the boarding house porch. "You're thinking about leaving," the older woman said. It wasn't a question. Mara didn't confirm or deny it. "I see it in your eyes," Mrs. Chen continued. "Same look young people get when they're not sure where they belong." "I don't belong anywhere." "That's because you haven't chosen anywhere yet." Mara looked at her. "What's the difference?" "Belonging happens when you stop running long enough to put down roots." Mrs. Chen's voice was matter of fact. "But you can't put down roots if you're always ready to pull them up again." "I'm not running from anything." "Aren't you?" Mara didn't answer. Mrs. Chen stood, joints creaking. "That Rourke man. He asked about you." Mara's heart skipped. "When?" "Last week. Wanted to know if you were well." "What did you tell him?" "That you were working hard and keeping to yourself." "Same as always." Mrs. Chen paused at the door. "He's a good man, you know. Quiet, honest, doesn't have many friends, but the ones he has trust him completely." "I'm not interested." "I didn't say you were." Mrs. Chen's expression was knowing, but maybe you should be. She went inside, leaving Mara alone on the porch with her thoughts. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Somewhere out there, beyond the edge of town, Ethan was probably sitting on his own porch watching the same sunset. Mara wondered what he thought about in moments like this. Then she pushed the thought away and went inside. October arrived with the first hard frost. Mara was walking back from the Miller house one evening when she saw smoke on the horizon, not the normal wood smoke of cooking fires, but thick black columns that meant something was burning. She broke into a run. The smoke was coming from the direction of Ethan's place. Mara didn't stop to question why that knowledge sent ice through her veins. She just ran harder, her breath coming in gasps, the cold air burning her lungs. By the time she reached the cabin, half the town had already gathered. The shed was fully engulfed, flames leaping into the darkening sky. Men formed a bucket brigade from the well, but it was clearly hopeless. The best they could do was wet down the cabin to keep the fire from spreading. Mara pushed through the crowd, searching for Ethan. She found him directing the bucket brigade, his face streaked with soot, his shirt singed. He was calm, methodical, coordinating the effort with quiet authority. Their eyes met across the chaos. Something passed between them, relief, maybe, or recognition. Then Ethan turned back to the fire, shouting instructions, and Mara found herself grabbing a bucket and falling into the line without thinking. They worked for hours. By the time the flames finally died down, nothing remained of the shed but smoking ruins. But the cabin had been saved, though the siding was blackened and the nearest window had cracked from the heat. People began drifting away, offering condolences and promises to help rebuild. Ethan thanked each one with the same quiet courtesy. Eventually, only Mara remained. They stood side by side, looking at the wreckage. Ethan's horse was safe in a neighbor's corral. Most of his tools had been in the shed. "I'm sorry," Mara said quietly. Ethan shrugged. "Could have been worse, could have been the cabin. What started it? Lantern, probably. I thought I'd put it out, but..." He trailed off, rubbing his face. The gesture left new streaks of soot. "Doesn't matter now." Mara wanted to say something comforting, something helpful, but she had nothing. Just the ache in her chest that had appeared the moment she'd seen the smoke and hadn't gone away. "You should rest," she said finally. "Should." But neither of them moved. "Miss Calloway." "Mara." Ethan looked at her. "What?" "My name is Mara. You can use it." Something shifted in his expression, surprise maybe, or hope. "All right, Mara." She liked the sound of her name in his voice. That should have scared her. It didn't. "I should go," she said. "Yes." She didn't move. Neither did he. That offer, Mara said quietly. To the church social. Is it still open? Ethan's eyes widened slightly. There's another one, next month. I might be interested in going. With me? If you're still willing. For the first time since she'd met him, Ethan smiled, really smiled. Not just a polite upturn of lips, but something genuine and warm that transformed his entire face. I'm willing, he said. Mara nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She turned and walked away before she could change her mind, before fear could reassert itself, before all the old wounds could remind her why this was a terrible idea. But when she glanced back from the edge of his property, Ethan was still standing there, watching her go. And she realized she was smiling too. The month that followed felt longer than all the weeks before it combined. Mara went through her days in a haze of anticipation and dread that she couldn't shake. Every morning she woke with the same thought. She'd agreed to go somewhere with Ethan Rourke. Every night she lay awake wondering if she'd lost her mind. The Miller children noticed her distraction. Even the twins seemed to sense something had shifted, fussing more than usual when she held them. Mrs. Miller asked twice if she was feeling well. Mara lied both times and said she was fine. She wasn't fine. She was terrified. Not of Ethan, at least not in the way she'd been terrified of men before. This was different. This was the fear of wanting something she didn't know how to want anymore. The fear of reaching for something that might disappear the moment her fingers closed around it. She almost backed out a dozen times. Almost. But every time she came close, she'd remember the way Ethan had looked at her across the smoking ruins of his shed, not with pity or expectation, just quiet recognition. Like he saw her, really saw her. That was more frightening than anything else. The social was scheduled for the first Saturday in November. As the day approached, Mara's nervousness transformed into something closer to panic. She had nothing suitable to wear. Her new blue dress was practical for work, not for whatever this was. She couldn't afford another dress. She considered canceling. Then Mrs. Chen knocked on her door 3 days before the social and handed her a package wrapped in brown paper. "What's this?" Mara asked. "Open it." Inside was a dress, deep green cotton with black trim, simple but well made. It was the kind of dress a respectable woman might wear to church or a community gathering, the kind of dress Mara had never owned. "I can't accept this," she said immediately. "You can, and you will." Mrs. Chen's tone allowed no argument. "Consider it a bonus for all your hard work." Don't insult me by refusing." The older woman's eyes were shrewd. "Besides, you need it. Can't go to a social in work clothes." Mara's throat felt tight. "How did you know?" "I know everything that happens in my house." Mrs. Chen smiled slightly. "Also, Ethan mentioned it when he stopped by yesterday." "He was here?" "Wanted to confirm you were still planning to attend. I told him you were." She raised an eyebrow. "You are, aren't you?" Mara looked down at the dress in her hands. The fabric was soft, well cared for. Someone had loved this dress once. "Yes," she heard herself say. "I am." Mrs. Chen nodded, satisfied. "Good. Now try it on and make sure it fits. I can take it in if needed." The dress fit perfectly, like it had been made for her. When Mara looked at herself in the small mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked normal, like someone who belonged in a place like Red Bluff, like someone who might actually deserve happiness. The thought made her want to cry, and she didn't know why. Saturday arrived with clear skies and unseasonably warm weather. Mara spent the morning at the Miller house, but Mrs. Miller sent her home early with a knowing smile and instructions to enjoy yourself for once. Back at the boarding house, Mara bathed and dressed with trembling hands. She'd never been this nervous before a social gathering in her life. Then again, she'd never gone to one voluntarily. The few times Garrett had dragged her to events in St. Louis, she'd spent the entire evening wishing she could disappear. This was different. This was her choice. That made it worse somehow. At exactly 3 o'clock, a knock sounded on the front door. Mara heard Mrs. Chen answer it, heard low voices in the hallway. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She took one last look in the mirror, smoothed down her dress, and went downstairs. Ethan stood in the entryway holding his hat. He'd cleaned up, wearing what was probably his best shirt, dark trousers without patches, boots that had been polished. His hair was still damp from washing. When he saw her, he went very still. "You look beautiful," he said quietly. The words hit Mara like a physical blow. She couldn't remember the last time someone had called her beautiful and meant it as a compliment rather than an evaluation. "Thank you," she managed. "You look presentable." A hint of amusement touched his eyes. "High praise." Mrs. Chen appeared from the kitchen. "You two should get going. Social starts at 3:30. Ethan offered Mara his arm. She stared at it for a moment before gingerly placing her hand on his sleeve. The contact felt strange, formal and distant, and somehow intimate all at once. They walked through town in silence. Mara was hyper-aware of every person they passed, every glance, every whispered comment. By tomorrow, everyone in Red Bluff would know she'd been seen with Ethan Rourke. The thought made her stomach churn. "You all right?" Ethan asked quietly. "Fine." "You're trembling." "I said I'm fine." He didn't push. They continued walking. The social was being held in the community hall, a large wooden building that served as everything from meeting place to dance hall to temporary schoolroom. By the time they arrived, it was already crowded with people. Tables laden with food lined one wall. Musicians were setting up in the corner. Children ran between clusters of adults, shouting and laughing. Mara's first instinct was to turn around and leave. Ethan's hand covered hers where it rested on his arm. "We don't have to stay long," he said. "Just long enough to be polite." "I don't want to be here." "I know." "Then why?" "Because sometimes the things we don't want to do are the things we need most." His voice was gentle. "But if you really want to leave, we will. Your choice." That was the problem. It was always her choice with him. He never pushed, never demanded, never tried to control. It would have been easier if he did. Then she could have something concrete to fight against. Instead, she just had his patience, his steady presence, his refusal to expect anything from her except what she was willing to give. It was infuriating and terrifying and somehow exactly what she needed. "We can stay," she said, "for a little while." Ethan's expression softened. "All right." He led her through the crowd, greeting people with quiet nods. Several men clapped him on the shoulder. A few women smiled at Mara with varying degrees of warmth and curiosity. She recognized most of them from town, the shopkeeper's wife, the banker's daughter, women she'd seen at church services she'd never attended. They found a relatively quiet corner near the food tables. Ethan brought her a cup of punch that was too sweet and a plate of cookies that were surprisingly good. They stood side by side, not quite touching, watching the room. "How's the rebuilding going?" Mara asked, just to break the silence. "Slow. Should have the new shed finished by spring." "That's a long time." "It's what I can afford." He said it matter-of-factly, without embarrassment. "Can't hire help, so I'm doing it myself when I have time." "What about your tools, your supplies?" "Lost most of them, keeping what I need at the cabin for now." He took a sip of punch, grimaced at the sweetness. "It'll work out." Mara wanted to ask how, wanted to know if he had enough to get through winter, if he was sleeping well, if the smoke damage to the cabin was as bad as it looked. But those were questions you asked people you cared about, and caring was dangerous. So instead she said, "The punch is terrible." Ethan's lips twitched. "Worst I've ever had." "Why did you bring me some then?" "Seemed like the polite thing to do." "Politeness is overrated." "Maybe, but it's all we've got sometimes." Before Mara could respond, the music started, a lively fiddle tune that had couples moving toward the center of the room. Ethan set down his cup and turned to her. "Would you like to dance?" Every muscle in Mara's body tensed. "I don't dance." "Can't or won't? Does it matter?" "Yes." She glared at him. "I don't want to." "All right." He didn't look offended, just nodded and turned back to watch the dancers. They stood in silence for several minutes. The music swirled around them. Couples spun past, laughing. Children darted between the adults. It was everything Mara had avoided for years. Community, connection, the simple joy of being part of something larger than yourself. It made her chest ache with longing she couldn't name. "I can't dance," she admitted quietly. "I never learned." Ethan looked at her. "Never?" Garrett didn't. She stopped. She'd said his name. After months of careful silence, she'd let it slip. Who's Garrett? Ethan asked, his voice carefully neutral. Mara's hands clenched around her cup. No one. Mara, I said he's no one. Her voice came out harsher than intended. Several people nearby turned to look. Mara felt heat rush to her face. Ethan's expression didn't change. All right, want to get some air? She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. He led her outside through a side door. The evening was cool, but not cold, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink. They walked away from the hall until the music faded to a distant murmur. Mara stopped near a fence post and wrapped her arms around herself. Ethan stood a few feet away, giving her space. I'm sorry, she said finally. For what? For snapping at you, for being... She gestured helplessly. This... You don't need to apologize for being hurt. I'm not hurt, I'm just... hurt, Ethan repeated gently. Someone hurt you badly. That's not your fault. Mara laughed, a broken sound. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? He moved closer, not touching, but near enough that she could feel his warmth. I know what it looks like when someone's been beaten down so many times they forget what it's like to stand up straight. I know what it sounds like when someone's so used to fighting they can't remember how to rest. You don't know anything about me. Then tell me. The words hung in the air between them. Mara's heart was pounding. Every instinct screamed at her to walk away, to maintain the walls she'd built so carefully. But she was tired, so tired of carrying everything alone. His name was Garrett Holloway, she heard herself say. We were married for 3 years. He wasn't a good man. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly, but he didn't interrupt. I thought I could fix him, Mara continued, the words coming faster now. Thought if I just tried harder, loved him better, didn't make him angry, but nothing I did was ever enough. He'd drink and he'd... Her voice broke. He'd hurt me. And then he'd apologize, swear he'd change. For a while he would. Then it would start again. How did you get away? He gambled, lost everything we had, the house, his business. When the creditors came, I saw my chance and I ran, took what little money I'd hidden and left St. Louis in the middle of the night. She looked down at her hands. I've been running ever since. Silence settled between them. Mara waited for judgment, for pity, for the 1,000 ways men reacted when they learned women like her existed. Thank you, Ethan said quietly. She looked up, confused. For what? For trusting me with that. I didn't... She stopped. But she hadn't she? She'd told him things she'd never told anyone in Red Bluff, things she'd sworn she'd take to her grave. I'm not looking for rescue, she said fiercely. I don't need someone to save me or fix me or... I know. I'm not broken. I know that too. Then why... She gestured between them helplessly. Why are you doing this? Ethan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft. Because I see you. Not who you were or who you think you should be. Just you. And I like what I see. Something cracked open in Mara's chest. She felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back furiously. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. This? Any of it. People. Connection. I don't know how to trust someone without waiting for them to turn. Neither do I. She looked at him sharply. What? Ethan's expression was distant, shadowed. I had a wife once. Sarah. We came out here together, full of plans and dreams. Then she got sick. Fever. I rode 3 days straight to get the doctor, but by the time we got back, he stopped. That was 6 years ago. Ethan, I'm not telling you to make you feel sorry for me, he continued. I'm telling you because I understand what it's like to have your whole world shatter, to not trust that anything good can last, to be afraid of wanting things because wanting leads to losing. Mara's throat felt tight. Then why try? Because the alternative is being alone for the rest of my life, and I'm tired of alone. He met her eyes directly. Aren't you? The question hit her like a blow. Was she tired of alone? She'd been alone so long she couldn't remember what anything else felt like. She'd convinced herself she preferred it, That isolation was safety. But standing here with Ethan, with the music drifting from the hall and the stars beginning to appear overhead, she felt something shift inside her. Maybe she was tired. Maybe she'd been tired for years and just refused to admit it. "I don't know what I am," she said honestly. "That's all right. We can figure it out together." Ethan extended his hand. One step at a time. Mara stared at his hand for a long moment. It wasn't the first time he'd offered it to her, but this time felt different. This time it wasn't about survival or necessity. This time it was about choice. She reached out and took it. His fingers closed around hers, warm, calloused, steady. They stood like that for several heartbeats, just holding hands in the fading light. "I'm scared," Mara admitted. "Me too. What if I can't do this? What if I'm too damaged?" "You're not damaged. You're human." Ethan's grip tightened slightly. "And humans get scared, get hurt, make mistakes. That's just how it works. That's a terrible system. The worst." A hint of humor crept into his voice. "But it's the only one we've got." Despite everything, Mara felt her lips curve slightly. "You're not very good at reassurance." "Never claimed to be." He tugged her gently back toward the hall. "Come on, let's go back inside." "I still don't want to dance." "Then we won't dance. We'll just stand there and eat terrible cookies while everyone else makes fools of themselves." "That sounds awful." "It does, doesn't it?" Ethan's eyes crinkled at the corners. "But we'll do it anyway." They walked back to the hall hand in hand, and somehow, impossibly, Mara felt lighter than she had in years. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. They didn't dance, but they talked. Small things. The weather, the town gossip Mara barely understood. Ethan's plans for his land. Nothing deep or meaningful. Just the kind of ordinary conversation people had when they were trying to know each other. It was strange, foreign, almost uncomfortable, but also nice. When the social finally ended, Ethan walked Mara back to the boarding house. They stopped on the porch, suddenly awkward again. "Thank you," Mara said, "for tonight. Thank you for coming." "I didn't do much, just stood around being difficult." "You showed up. That's what mattered." Ethan's expression was soft in the lamplight. "Can I see you again?" Her heart stuttered. "Why?" "Because I'd like to." "That's not a reason." "It's the only one I need." Mara wanted to say no, wanted to retreat back into the safety of isolation, but she'd spent the entire evening waiting for something to go wrong, and nothing had. Ethan had been exactly what he'd promised, patient, honest, content with whatever she was willing to give. "All right," she heard herself say. "Yes." Ethan's smile was genuine and warm. "Sunday afternoon? I could show you the land." "The land?" "Where I'm hoping to build. It's beautiful this time of year." Mara should have made excuses, should have found reasons to refuse, but instead she nodded. "Sunday afternoon. I'll come by at 2. "All right." They stood there for another moment, neither quite ready to leave. Then Ethan touched the brim of his hat, turned, and walked away into the darkness. Mara watched until he disappeared, then went inside. Mrs. Chen was waiting in the parlor, pretending to read. She looked up when Mara entered. "Well?" the older woman asked. "Well, what?" "How was it?" Mara thought about the question seriously. Terrifying, awkward, strange. And nice. It was nice. Mrs. Chen's smile was knowing. "Good. Now get some rest. You look exhausted." Mara climbed the stairs to her room, changed into her nightgown, and lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Her mind wouldn't stop replaying the evening, Ethan's hand in hers, his quiet understanding, the way he'd looked at her like she was worth knowing. She was in so much trouble. Sunday came too fast and too slow at the same time. Mara spent the morning at the Miller house, but her mind kept drifting. Mrs. Miller noticed and sent her home early again, this time with a conspiratorial smile that made Mara blush. At exactly 2 o'clock, Ethan arrived with his horse. He helped Mara mount, then swung up behind her, a reversal of their first ride together. This time, Mara didn't hold herself quite so rigidly. This time, when Ethan's arm came around her to hold the reins, she didn't flinch away. They rode south out of town, into the open country. The land here rolled gently, broken by occasional stands of cottonwood and willow near the rare creek beds. The grass was brown with approaching winter, but the sky was impossibly blue, and the air had that crystalline quality that came with the cold season. After about 30 minutes, Ethan guided the horse up a small rise and stopped. "There," he said, gesturing ahead. Mara looked. Below them spread a small valley, maybe 40 acres, protected on three sides by low hills. A creek cut through the center, lined with trees. The land was mostly flat, perfect for building, for planting, for raising animals. It was beautiful in the way empty places could be beautiful, full of potential, waiting for someone to see what it could become. "Is this yours?" Mara asked. "Filed the claim last spring. Should be official by next year." "It's beautiful." "It could be." Ethan's voice held a note of longing. "I've got plans. House there." He pointed to a slight rise near the creek. "Barn and outbuildings there. Maybe an orchard if I can get trees to take. Enough pasture for cattle and horses." "That's ambitious." "Maybe, but I've got time." He paused. "And I'm hoping I won't be doing it alone." Mara's breath caught. "Ethan, not today," he said quickly. "I'm not asking anything today. Just showing you possibilities, that's all." They sat in silence, looking out over the empty land. Mara tried to imagine what he described: a house, a barn, life. Tried to imagine herself as part of that picture. It should have felt impossible. It should have terrified her. Instead, it felt almost hopeful. "Can we walk?" she asked. Ethan dismounted and helped her down. They left the horse to graze and walked into the valley, following the creek. The water was low this time of year, but still running clear over smooth stones. Birds called from the trees. The wind whispered through dry grass. "Why here?" Mara asked. "Why this spot specifically?" "It feels right." Ethan picked up a smooth stone and turned it over in his hands. "After Sarah died, I couldn't stay in the old place. Too many memories. I rode for days, looking for somewhere that felt like I could start over. Found this valley and knew. Knew what? That this was where I was supposed to be." He tossed the stone into the creek. "I know that sounds foolish." "No," Mara said quietly. "It doesn't." They continued walking. The sun was warm despite the season. Mara found herself relaxing, letting her guard drop inch by inch. Ethan didn't try to fill the silence with empty conversation. He just walked beside her, occasionally pointing out a hawk overhead or the tracks of some animal in the mud. Eventually they stopped near a cluster of cottonwoods where the creek widened into a small pool. "This would be a good spot for a house," Mara said, studying the way the land sloped. "That's what I thought." Ethan's voice was careful, like he was trying not to seem too eager. "Close to water, trees for shade, protected from the wind. You'd need a good foundation. The ground floods here in spring." "How do you know?" Mara pointed to the waterline visible on the tree trunks. "See that mark? That's how high the water gets when the snow melts." Ethan looked at the marks, then at her. "That's smart. I hadn't noticed that. My father was a builder. Before—" She stopped. She hadn't talked about her father in years. "Before he died. I used to help him sometimes. Learned a few things." "Like what?" "How to read the land, how to see what water does over time, how to tell if soil will support weight." She knelt and grabbed a handful of earth, squeezing it. "This is good soil. Clay content, but not too much. It'll hold." When she looked up, Ethan was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "What?" she asked. "Nothing, just you're full of surprises. Is that good or bad?" "Good." His voice was warm. "Definitely good." Mara stood, brushing dirt from her hands. "I don't know anything about building anymore. Haven't done it in years. But you remember." "Some." She looked around the valley again, seeing it with new eyes. "You'd want the house facing south, maximum sunlight in winter. Barn on the north side to block wind. Plant windbreaks on the west. That's where the worst weather comes from." Ethan was smiling now. "Anything else?" "Plenty, but you didn't bring me here for a building consultation." "Didn't I?" Mara looked at him sharply. "Did you?" "Maybe partly." He moved closer, not quite touching. Wanted to see what you thought. If you could see what I see. And can I? Can you? Mara turned back to the valley. In her mind's eye, she could see it. The house Ethan described, smoke rising from the chimney, the barn and outbuildings, fences marking pastures, trees growing tall, life taking root in empty space. And somehow, impossibly, she could see herself there too. The realization terrified her. I should get back, she said abruptly. Mara, I have work tomorrow. Early start. Ethan's face fell slightly, but he nodded. All right. They walked back to the horse in silence. The ride to town felt longer than the ride out. Mara sat stiffly again, walls rebuilding themselves brick by brick. When they reached the boarding house, Ethan helped her dismount. She turned to thank him and found him watching her with that same patient understanding that made her want to scream. I scared you, he said quietly. Showing you the land. No. Yes. He wasn't accusing, just stating fact. I pushed too fast, I'm sorry. You didn't push anything. I asked to see it. And now you're running away. Mara's jaw tightened. I'm not running. Aren't you? She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he was wrong, that she was fine, that nothing had changed, but the lie wouldn't come. I don't know if I can do this, she admitted. The land, the plans, the future? I don't know if I'm capable of being what you need. What I need, Ethan said gently, is someone honest, someone real, that's all. Not someone perfect, not someone without fear or scars, just someone willing to try. What if trying isn't enough? Then we'll figure that out together. He took her hand, just held it, nothing more. But we won't know unless we try. Mara looked down at their joined hands. She should pull away, should thank him for a nice afternoon and make it clear this couldn't continue. Instead, she said, I need time. Take all the time you need. I mean it. I can't. I don't want to make promises I can't keep. I'm not asking for promises. Ethan's thumb brushed across her knuckles. Just your company, when you're willing to give it. That should have felt like too little, like an insult even, but somehow it felt like exactly enough. All right, Mara said. I can do that. Good. Ethan released her hand and stepped back. Can I see you again this week? Maybe Thursday? After I finish at the Miller's? Thursday works. They stood there awkwardly for another moment. Then Ethan touched his hat brim, mounted his horse, and rode away. Mara watched him go, her hand still tingling where he'd touched it. Mrs. Chen was waiting inside, of course. She didn't say anything, just looked at Mara with those knowing eyes. Don't start, Mara said. I didn't say anything. You were thinking it. I'm always thinking, Mrs. Chen returned to her knitting. Doesn't mean I'll say it out loud. Mara climbed the stairs, feeling the weight of the day settle into her bones. She'd shown Ethan a part of herself she'd kept hidden for years. She'd let herself imagine a future that didn't involve running. That was progress. Terrifying, painful progress. But progress nonetheless. Thursday came. Then another Sunday. Then another week. Gradually, seeing Ethan became routine. Not constant. He had his work and she had hers, but regular. Twice a week, sometimes 3 times. Always simple things. Walks. Talks. Shared meals at the boarding house when Mrs. Chen invited him to stay. The town noticed, of course. Red Bluff was too small for secrets. Mara heard the whispers, saw the knowing looks. She waited for judgment, for scandal, for someone to say something cruel about the broken woman and the lonely rancher. But mostly people just seemed pleased, like they'd been hoping for this outcome all along. November slipped into December. The first real snow fell, transforming the brown landscape into something magical and clean. The Miller children were ecstatic. Even the twins seemed fascinated by the white world outside their windows. Ethan invited Mara to the valley again, this time in the snow. They rode out through the white silence, and Mara saw how different the land looked under its winter blanket. Peaceful, almost sacred. I've been thinking, Ethan said as they stood near the creek, about the house. Oh? If I'm going to build it, I should do it right, not rush. Take time to do things properly. Mara heard what he wasn't saying. You want help? I'd like your input, if you're willing. He turned to face her. You understand building in a way I don't, and I trust your judgment. Trust. He said it so easily, like it was the simplest thing in the world. For Mara, trust was still a foreign language she was learning word by painful word. I can look at your plans, she said carefully. Give you my thoughts. That's all I'm asking. They spent the afternoon sketching rough diagrams in the snow with sticks, debating placement and size and orientation. Mara found herself getting caught up in the details, remembering things her father had taught her decades ago. How to frame a roof for maximum strength, how to position windows for cross-ventilation, how to build foundations that would last. Ethan listened to everything she said, asked questions, made notes in a small book he pulled from his coat. By the time they rode back to town, Mara's cheeks hurt from smiling. Christmas approached. The town prepared for celebrations. Decorations appearing in windows, special services planned, talk of gift exchanges and community meals. Mara had never cared much for the season. Too many memories of Garrett's drunken rages during what was supposed to be a joyful time. But this year felt different. Mrs. Chen was hosting a Christmas dinner for the boarders and a few select friends. She'd invited Ethan. Mara helped with preparations, peeling potatoes and rolling pie crusts, and tried not to think about how domestic it all felt. Christmas Eve arrived cold and clear. The dinner was warm chaos. Too many people crowded around Mrs. Chen's table, passing dishes and telling stories and laughing. Ethan sat beside Mara, their shoulders occasionally brushing in the cramped space. After dinner, people drifted into the parlor. Someone produced a fiddle. Songs filled the air. Some festive, some bawdy, some old folk tunes that everyone seemed to know except Mara. She stood near the window watching snow fall in the lamplight when Ethan appeared at her elbow. You all right? He asked quietly. Yes, just thinking. About? How different this is from before. Is that good or bad? Mara considered the question seriously. Good. Scary, but good. Ethan nodded. I have something for you. What? No, I didn't get you anything. I didn't expect you to. He pulled a small package from his pocket, wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. It's nothing fancy, just something I thought you might like. Mara took the package with trembling hands. Inside was a small leather-bound journal and a pencil. I noticed you don't have anywhere to write down your thoughts, Ethan said. About building, about plans, about anything. Thought you might want a place to keep track of ideas. It was practical, simple, perfect. Mara's throat felt tight. Thank you. You're welcome. They stood in silence, watching the snow fall. Eventually, Ethan spoke again. I've been thinking, he said carefully, about spring, about starting to build. That's good. And I was wondering, he paused, how you'd feel about being there, not just for planning, but for the actual work. Mara looked at him sharply. What are you asking? I'm asking if you'd consider working on the house with me when you have time. I know you're busy with the Millers, but maybe on Sundays, or... Yes. Ethan blinked. Yes? Yes. I'd like that. The words came easier than she expected. I'd like to build something. The smile that spread across Ethan's face made something warm bloom in Mara's chest. He reached for her hand and squeezed it gently. Thank you, he said. And standing there in Mrs. Chen's parlor, surrounded by music and warmth and the promise of snow, Mara realized something had shifted inside her. She wasn't running anymore. She was choosing to stay. Winter deepened its grip on Wyoming territory with a ferocity that surprised even the old-timers. January brought blizzards that buried Red Bluff under 3 feet of snow, trapping everyone indoors for days at a time. The wind howled like something alive and angry, rattling windows and finding every crack in every wall. Mara spent those frozen weeks at the boarding house, watching the white world through frosted glass and wondering if Ethan was all right out at his cabin. Mrs. Chen assured her he'd weathered worse, but the worry gnawed at her anyway. She'd check the road every morning, looking for signs of riders, and feel her stomach drop when she saw nothing but endless white. On the 5th day of being trapped inside, a knock came at the door. Mrs. Chen answered it and returned with snow-covered letters. One was addressed to Mara in unfamiliar handwriting. Her hand shook as she opened it. The message was brief. Ethan writing to say he was fine, the cabin was holding, and he hoped she was staying warm. He'd drawn a small sketch at the bottom of the house they'd planned, with a note that he'd been refining the designs during the storm. He hoped to show her when the weather cleared. Mara read the letter 3 times, then tucked it into her journal and tried to ignore the way her heart had lifted at seeing his words on paper. The storm finally broke in mid-January. Mara returned to work at the Miller house, where chaos had multiplied during the confinement. The children were wild with cabin fever, the twins had developed colds, and Mrs. Miller looked ready to collapse. "I've never been so happy to see anyone in my life," she said when Mara arrived. "Take them, please, take them anywhere." Mara bundled the older children into coats and boots and led them outside to burn off energy in the snow. They built forts, threw snowballs, and shrieked with laughter until their cheeks were bright red and their mittens were soaked through. When she finally herded them back inside, Mrs. Miller had hot chocolate waiting. The children drank it greedily while Mara peeled off their wet layers and hung everything by the fire to dry. "You're a miracle worker," Mrs. Miller said, nursing one of the twins. "I don't know what I'd do without you." "They're good children, just needed to run." "Still," Mrs. Miller's expression turned thoughtful. "I heard Ethan Rourke has been courting you." Mara's hand stilled on the coat she was hanging. "People talk too much in this town." "It's a small town. There's nothing else to do," Mrs. Miller smiled. "He's a good man, Mara, one of the best." "I know. Then why do you look so terrified every time someone mentions him?" Mara didn't answer immediately. She finished hanging the coats, checked that the children were occupied with toys, then sat across from Mrs. Miller. "I was married before," she said quietly. "It didn't end well." "I know. Mrs. Chen told me a little." At Mara's sharp look, Mrs. Miller raised a hand. "Nothing detailed, just that you'd had a hard time and needed a fresh start. We all respected that." "Then you understand why I'm cautious." "I understand why you're scared. But there's a difference between caution and letting fear make your decisions for you." Mrs. Miller adjusted the baby at her breast. "Ethan's not your first husband. From what I've seen, he's nothing like him." "How would you know?" "Because I've seen how he looks at you. Like you're something precious he's afraid to break. That's not the look of a man who hurts women." She paused. "And I've seen how you look at him when you think no one's watching. That's not the look of a woman who's afraid. That's the look of someone who's afraid of wanting something good." The words hit too close to home. Mara stood abruptly. "I should check on the children." Mrs. Miller didn't push, but her knowing smile followed Mara out of the room. That evening, as Mara walked back to the boarding house through the blue twilight, she spotted a familiar figure waiting on the porch. Her heart gave an involuntary leap. Ethan stood when he saw her, hat in hand. "Evening." "Evening." Mara climbed the steps slowly. "I got your letter." "Good. Wasn't sure it would get through. Storm's over now." For the moment. Ethan shifted his weight. "I was wondering if you'd like to come out to the valley this Sunday. Weather's supposed to be clear. Thought we could start staking out where the foundation will go." Mara should have made excuses. Should have put distance between them after Mrs. Miller's too perceptive observations. But instead she heard herself say, "What time?" "Afternoon? Give the ground time to warm up a bit." "All right." Something eased in Ethan's expression. "All right, I'll come by at 1. He started to leave, then turned back. "Mara, I'm glad you're safe. During the storm, I mean. I worried." "I worried about you too," she admitted before she could stop herself. The smile he gave her was worth the vulnerability. Sunday arrived bright and cold. Mara dressed in her warmest clothes and met Ethan outside at precisely 1 o'clock. They rode to the valley in comfortable silence, the landscape transformed by snow into something almost otherworldly. When they reached the building site, Ethan had already marked several stakes in the ground, marking the corners of the proposed house. He'd clearly been here earlier, clearing snow and preparing. "I thought we could walk the perimeter," he said, helping her down from the horse. "Make sure the placement feels right before we commit." They walked the marked boundaries together, Mara checking sight lines and drainage, Ethan asking questions about load-bearing walls and room divisions. The conversation was technical, focused, but underneath it ran a current of something else: partnership, collaboration, trust. The front should face southeast, Mara said, studying the sun's position. You'll get morning light in the kitchen that way, evening light in the main room. What about the bedrooms? North side, cooler in summer. You can bank the shared wall with the main room for warmth in winter. Ethan was taking notes in his small book, his breath misting in the cold air. How many bedrooms? The question caught Mara off guard. I don't know. How many do you need? Depends. He looked at her directly. On whether I'm building for one person or more. Her heart hammered. Ethan, I'm not proposing, he said quickly. Just being practical. Houses last longer than people. Might as well build for possibilities. Mara swallowed hard. 3 bedrooms, then. Master bedroom, guest room, and 1 extra, for storage or future use. Future use, Ethan repeated softly. I like the sound of that. They continued working through the afternoon, adjusting stakes, sketching plans in the snow, debating details. Mara found herself getting lost in the work, in the simple pleasure of creating something from nothing. Her father had taught her that building was an act of hope. You couldn't build for the present alone. You had to build for what might come. As the sun began to set, painting the snow pink and gold, Ethan built a small fire to warm them. They sat on a fallen log, sharing the coffee he'd brought in a thermos, and watched the light change over the valley. Can I ask you something? Ethan said after a long silence. You can ask. Doesn't mean I'll answer. Fair enough. He took a sip of coffee. What made you say yes to the social? That first time? Mara considered lying, deflecting, but they'd come too far for that. I was tired, she said simply. Tired of being afraid, tired of being alone. And you'd been nothing but kind, even when I gave you no reason to be. I thought, maybe I could trust that, just for one evening. And now? Now I don't know what I think. She looked at him. This terrifies me, Ethan. All of it, the valley, the plans, the way you look at me like I'm not broken beyond repair. I keep waiting for it to fall apart, for you to realize I'm not worth the effort. You're wrong about that. Am I? You barely know me. You don't know what I've done, the mistakes I've made. I know enough. Ethan's voice was firm. I know you're honest, even when honesty costs you. I know you work harder than anyone I've ever met. I know you're good with children and understand building and notice things other people miss. I know you've survived things that would have broken most people, and you're still standing. That doesn't mean I'm capable of being what you need. What I need, Ethan said carefully, is someone who sees me, really sees me. Not who I was before Sarah died. Not some idealized version of what a rancher should be. Just me, flawed and lonely and trying to build something meaningful. He paused. You see me, Mara, and I see you. That's more than most people ever get. Mara's throat felt tight. What if I can't do this? What if I wake up one day and the fear is too much and I run? Then I'll miss you. His honesty was devastating. But I won't stop you. You've earned the right to make your own choices, even if those choices don't include me. That's not... She stopped, frustrated. You should be angry. You should demand something from me, some kind of commitment or promise. Why? So I can hold it over you later? So you can feel trapped? Ethan shook his head. I don't want you trapped, Mara. I want you here because you choose to be. Not because you're afraid of disappointing me or breaking some promise you made under pressure. That's not how this works. Relationships require commitment. Eventually, maybe, but first they require trust. And trust takes time. He looked at her steadily. I've got time. Question is, do you? Did she? Mara didn't know. Part of her wanted to run right now, to put distance between herself and these terrifying feelings before they could hurt her. But another part, a part that was growing stronger every day, wanted to stay. Wanted to see what they could build together. Wanted to believe she deserved something good. I'm still scared, she whispered. Me too. But I want to try. I think I want to try. Ethan's smile was gentle. That's all I'm asking. They sat in silence as the sun finished setting and the stars began to appear. When the cold finally drove them back to the horse, Ethan helped Mara mount, and they rode back to town through the blue darkness. At the boarding house, Ethan helped her down and held her hand for a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you," he said, "for today, for trying. Thank you for being patient." "I'm good at patient." Mara laughed, a real laugh, surprised and genuine. "You really are." She went inside feeling lighter than she had in years. February brought more snow, but fewer storms. Mara settled into a new routine that included regular trips to the valley with Ethan. They couldn't do much actual building yet. The ground was still too frozen. But they could plan, refine designs, order materials, prepare. Mara found herself sketching in her journal late at night, working out structural problems, imagining what the finished house would look like. She'd never admitted to anyone how much she'd loved building with her father, how losing him had felt like losing a part of herself. Working with Ethan brought that part of her back to life. The town continued to watch their courtship with barely concealed interest. Mara heard the whispers, the speculation about when Ethan would propose, whether she'd accept, what kind of wedding they'd have. She tried to ignore it, but the constant attention wore on her nerves. One afternoon in late February, she snapped at a woman in the general store who asked when she and Ethan were making it official. "That's none of your concern," Mara said sharply. The woman's eyes widened. "I was just being friendly." "No, you were being nosy. There's a difference." She left the store with her purchases and the woman's offended expression burning in her memory. She knew she'd been rude, knew she should probably apologize, but she was tired of everyone having opinions about her life. That evening, Ethan showed up at the boarding house looking troubled. "Can we talk?" he asked. Mara's stomach dropped. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Just, let's walk." They walked through town in tense silence. Finally, Ethan spoke. "Mrs. Henderson came by my place this afternoon, said you were rude to her at the store." Mara's jaw tightened. "She was prying into our business. She was making conversation. It's what people do. It's what people do when they want gossip fodder." Ethan stopped walking and turned to face her. "Mara, this is a small town. People are going to talk. They're going to be curious. That's not going to change." "I know that." "Then why let it bother you so much?" "Because it's my life." The words burst out louder than she intended. "It's my choice, my decisions, and everyone acts like they have a right to an opinion about it, like I owe them answers or explanations, or You don't owe anyone anything," Ethan interrupted gently, "but snapping at people who mean well isn't going to make this easier." "I don't care about easy." "I know. You care about control." His voice was kind but firm. "And I understand that, and after everything you've been through, wanting control makes sense, but you can't control what people think or say, only how you respond." Mara felt tears prick her eyes. "I'm trying." "I know you are." Ethan reached for her hand. "But maybe try a little differently. Mrs. Henderson is a gossip, but she's not mean. She was genuinely happy for us. And you made her feel small for showing interest." The words stung because they were true. Mara had been so focused on protecting herself that she hadn't considered how her defensiveness might hurt others. "I should apologize to her," she said quietly. "Might help." They started walking again. After a moment, Mara spoke. "Do you ever regret this? Getting involved with someone so broken?" Ethan stopped again, this time pulling her around to face him. "Listen to me carefully. You are not broken. You're hurt. There's a difference. Broken things can't heal. Hurt things can." His hands tightened on her shoulders. "And you are healing, Mara. Every day. I see it happening." "I don't feel like I'm healing. I feel like I'm barely holding myself together." That's what healing feels like sometimes. Messy and hard and painful. But it's still healing. He paused. "And no, I don't regret this. Not for a second." Mara leaned into him without thinking, resting her forehead against his chest. Ethan's arms came around her carefully, like he was afraid she'd bolt. But she didn't bolt. She just stood there, letting herself be held, and tried to remember when the last time was that someone had held her without wanting something in return. She couldn't remember. "I'll apologize to Mrs. Henderson tomorrow," she murmured into his shirt. "Good. And I'll try to be less defensive. That's all I ask." They stood like that for a long moment, wrapped in each other's warmth against the February cold. When they finally pulled apart, Mara felt steadier. "Walk me back?" she asked. "Always." True to her word, Mara apologized to Mrs. Henderson the next day. The woman accepted with good grace and even invited Mara to a quilting circle, which Mara politely declined. But the interaction was friendly, and Mara felt better for having made the effort. March arrived with the first hints of spring. The snow began to melt, turning the streets to mud and the creek in the valley to a rushing torrent. Ethan said they could start actual construction work by mid-April if the weather held. Mara's anticipation grew with each passing day. She spent her evenings going over the plans, making final adjustments, calculating materials and costs. Ethan had saved enough for the foundation and frame. The rest they'd add as money allowed. One evening, Mara was sketching window placements when Mrs. Chen knocked on her door. "Letter for you," the older woman said, handing over an envelope. Mara's blood ran cold when she saw the handwriting. It was from St. Louis. From Garrett. Her hand shook as she tore it open. The letter was brief, written in Garrett's familiar scrawl that still made her stomach turn. He'd found her. Somehow, he'd tracked her to Red Bluff. He was coming for her. She'd made vows before the law, and she belonged to him. If she didn't return to St. Louis willingly, he'd drag her back. He'd arrive within the month. The letter ended with a threat thinly veiled as affection. She was his wife. She'd always be his wife. Running had only delayed the inevitable. Mara read it 3 times, her vision blurring. Then she crumpled it in her fist and tried to breathe through the panic rising in her chest. This couldn't be happening. Not now. Not when she was finally starting to believe in the possibility of a different life. But Garrett had found her. And he was coming. She had to run. Had to leave before he arrived. Maybe head west to California or north to Montana. Somewhere he couldn't follow. Somewhere she could disappear completely. The thought of leaving made her physically ill. Leaving the Millers. Leaving Mrs. Chen. Leaving the life she'd built here. Leaving Ethan. But what choice did she have? She couldn't face Garrett, couldn't go back to that life. And she couldn't drag Ethan into this mess. It wasn't fair to him. Mara packed her few belongings with shaking hands, her mind racing through possibilities. The stagecoach ran twice a week. She could be on the next one, gone before anyone knew what was happening. She'd leave a note for Mrs. Chen, some excuse about a family emergency. The older woman would be disappointed, but she'd understand. She wouldn't leave a note for Ethan. Couldn't bear to write the words that would explain why she was running. Better to just disappear. He'd move on eventually, find someone less complicated. Someone who deserved him. The thought made her chest ache, but she pushed the feeling down. This was for the best. The only option. She was reaching for her coat when another knock came at the door. "Mara? It's me!" Ethan's voice froze her in place. "Not now," she called out, her voice shaking. "I need to talk to you. It's important. I said not now." "Mara, please." She squeezed her eyes shut. "Go away, Ethan." Silence. Then, "What's wrong?" "Nothing. I just need to be alone." "You're lying. I can hear it in your voice." A pause. "I'm not leaving until you talk to me." Damn him and his stubbornness. Damn him for caring enough to push when she needed him to walk away. Mara opened the door. Ethan took one look at her face and pushed past her into the room. His eyes went immediately to the packed bag on the bed. "Where are you going?" His voice was carefully controlled. "Doesn't matter." "Like hell it doesn't." "Ethan, please, just let me go." "No." He crossed his arms. "Not until you tell me what's happening." Mara felt something crack inside her. "He found me. Garrett. He sent a letter. He's coming for me." The color drained from Ethan's face. "When?" "Within the month." "What did the letter say?" Mara handed him the crumpled paper with shaking hands. Ethan read it, his jaw tightening with each line. When he finished, he looked at her with an expression she couldn't read. "You're not going back to him." "I know. That's why I'm leaving." "Running, you mean?" The word hit like a slap. "What else am I supposed to do?" "Stand and fight." Mara laughed bitterly. "Fight? With what? I'm still legally his wife. He has rights." "He has nothing." Ethan's voice was hard. Marriage doesn't give him the right to hurt you, doesn't give him the right to chase you across the country and make threats. The law sees it differently. Then we'll change what the law sees. He moved closer. Mara, you don't have to run. Not anymore. We can fight this together. There's no we in this, Ethan. This is my problem. Is it? Because last I checked, we've been building a life together, planning a future. That makes your problems my problems. I never asked for that. You didn't have to ask. His eyes were intense, burning. I'm offering. I'm standing here telling you that you don't have to face this alone. Why can't you accept that? Because I can't let you get hurt because of me. The words tore out of her. Garrett is dangerous. If he finds out about you, about us, he'll what? Come after me? Ethan's laugh was sharp. Let him try. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. You're scared. You think running will keep everyone safe, but all running does is guarantee you'll be alone when he finds you. He gripped her shoulders. Stay, please. Let me help you. Mara wanted to. Wanted it so badly her whole body ached with it, but the fear was stronger. I can't, she whispered. I can't put you in danger. I can't watch him hurt you because of me. That's not your choice to make. It's mine. And I choose to stand with you. His voice softened. Please, Mara. Trust me. Trust us. The word hung in the air between them. Trust. That impossible, terrifying thing she'd spent years avoiding. But looking at Ethan now, seeing the determination in his eyes, the absolute certainty that he meant every word he was saying, something shifted inside her. Maybe she didn't have to run. Maybe she didn't have to face this alone. Maybe, just maybe, she could trust someone to stand beside her. What would we do? She asked quietly. How would we fight this? Ethan's expression eased slightly. First, we talk to the marshal. See what the law actually says about men chasing their wives across state lines. Second, we make sure everyone in town knows what's happening. Garrett might think twice about causing trouble if he knows he'll have witnesses. Third, he paused. Third, you don't go anywhere alone until this is resolved. I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm telling you. His hand slid down to take hers. I'm not letting you face him alone, Mara. Whatever happens, we face it together. Mara felt tears spill down her cheeks. Why? Why would you do this for me? Ethan's smile was gentle. Because I love you. The words stopped her heart. What? I love you, he repeated, steady and sure. I've loved you since you told me to keep my charity and climbed onto my horse anyway. I love your strength and your stubbornness and the way you see the world. I love that you're trying so hard to heal, even when it terrifies you. He reached up to wipe her tears with his thumb. And I'm not going to let some bastard from your past destroy what we're building, not without a fight. Mara couldn't speak, could barely breathe. No one had ever said those words to her. Not like this, not meaning them. You don't have to say it back, Ethan continued. I'm not expecting anything. I just need you to know that you're not alone in this. You never have to be alone again. Not if you don't want to be. Something broke open inside Mara. All the walls she'd built, all the defenses she'd maintained. They crumbled like sand and left her raw and exposed and terrified. And free. I don't know if I can love anyone, she whispered. Garrett took that from me. He took so much. He didn't take anything. He tried to break you, and he failed. Ethan pulled her close. You're still here, Mara. Still standing. Still capable of everything you were before him. It's just going to take time to remember that. Mara buried her face in his chest and let herself cry, really cry, for the first time since leaving St. Louis. All the fear, all the pain, all the accumulated weight of running and hiding and surviving alone. It poured out of her in great heaving sobs while Ethan held her and murmured soft reassurances into her hair. When the tears finally subsided, Mara pulled back and looked at him. His shirt was soaked with her tears. His eyes were red-rimmed, but his expression was unwavering. I'm still scared, she said. I know. I don't know if I can do this. We'll figure it out together. He's going to make trouble. He's going to try to hurt us both. Let him try. Mara took a shaking breath. Then she made her choice. All right, she said. I'll stay. We'll fight this together. The relief on Ethan's face was almost painful to see. He pulled her close again, holding her like she was something precious and breakable and worth protecting. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Mara believed she might actually be all three. They went to see Marshal Hawkins first thing the next morning. The marshal's office sat at the edge of Red Bluff's main street, a squat wooden building that smelled of old coffee and tobacco. Hawkins himself was a weathered man in his 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that had kept the peace in Red Bluff for nearly a decade. He listened without interrupting as Mara explained her situation, Ethan standing solid beside her. When she finished, Hawkins leaned back in his chair and studied them both. "You still legally married to this Holloway fellow?" he asked. "Yes," Mara said quietly. "I never filed for divorce. Couldn't afford it." "That complicates things." Hawkins pulled out a ledger and began making notes. "Law's murky when it comes to marital disputes. Husband has certain legal rights over his wife, property being among them." "She's not property," Ethan said, his voice hard. "I know that and you know that, but the law sees it different." Hawkins looked at Mara. "Did he ever strike you? Can you prove it?" "Yes, but I have no witnesses. He was careful about that." "Letters? Anything in writing that shows a pattern of abuse?" Mara shook her head. "Just the one he sent threatening to come get me." Hawkins held out his hand. "Let me see it." Mara retrieved the crumpled letter from her pocket. The marshal read it slowly, his expression darkening. "This is a threat, plain enough," he said, "but proving criminal intent is another matter. Man could claim he's just trying to reconcile with his estranged wife. Court might see it his way." "So there's nothing we can do?" Mara felt the fear creeping back in. "I didn't say that." Hawkins set the letter down. "I said the law is murky, but there are ways around murky. First thing, you need to file for divorce. Get it on record that you're seeking legal separation. That changes the dynamic from wayward wife to woman exercising her rights." "I don't have money for a lawyer. Judge Thornton owes me a favor. I'll talk to him. See if we can expedite things without the usual fees." Hawkins looked at Ethan. "You planning to marry her once the divorce comes through?" Ethan didn't hesitate. "Yes." The certainty in his voice made Mara's breath catch. They'd never discussed marriage explicitly, but Ethan said it like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Hawkins nodded. "Good. That'll help the case. Shows you're not just running from one man, but running toward a legitimate future. Judge likes that kind of thing." "How long will a divorce take?" Mara asked. "Depends. Could be weeks, could be months. Holloway can contest it, drag things out." Hawkins tapped the letter. "But given this threat, we might be able to argue abandonment and cruelty. Speed things up." "And in the meantime?" Ethan asked. "When he shows up in Red Bluff?" "When, not if," Hawkins corrected. "Man sends a letter like this, he's coming. Question is what he plans to do when he gets here." The marshal leaned forward. "I can't arrest him for just showing up, but I can make it clear he's being watched. And if he makes any move toward Mara that could be construed as threatening or violent, I can intervene." "Define intervene," Ethan said. "Lock him up if he causes trouble. Escort him out of town if he doesn't. Man's got no property here, no business. If he can't prove legitimate purpose for being in Red Bluff, I can make his stay real uncomfortable." Hawkins looked at Mara. "But you need to stay visible. Don't go anywhere alone. Don't put yourself in situations where it's your word against his." "I'll make sure of that," Ethan said. They left the marshal's office with a plan, thin as it was. File for divorce. Stay visible. Wait for Garrett to make his move and hope Hawkins could contain him. It wasn't much, but it was more than Mara had when she'd been packing her bags to run. Word spread through Red Bluff with the speed of wildfire. By that evening, everyone knew Mara's estranged husband was coming to town, and everyone had an opinion about it. Some people were sympathetic. Others whispered that she must have done something to drive him to such lengths. A few suggested she should just go back and stop causing trouble. Mara tried to ignore the talk, but it wore on her. She'd spent months building a quiet life here, staying beneath notice. Now she was the center of attention, her past laid bare for everyone to examine and judge. Mrs. Chen became fiercely protective. She informed Mara in no uncertain terms that she wasn't going anywhere without escort, and that the boarding house door would be locked tight every night. The Millers were equally supportive. Mrs. Miller insisted Mara stay for dinner most evenings, surrounding her with the chaos and warmth of family. Mr. Miller, usually quiet, made a point of mentioning he kept a shotgun by the door and knew how to use it. Even the women Mara had kept at arm's length reached out. Mrs. Henderson stopped by with a basket of muffins and an apology for being nosy. The banker's wife offered to teach Mara to shoot, just in case. The seamstress gave her a knife small enough to hide in a boot and sharp enough to do damage. Red Bluff was closing ranks around her, and Mara didn't know what to do with that kind of solidarity. "This is what community means," Mrs. Chen said one evening. "We take care of our own." "I'm not one of yours," Mara protested. "I've only been here a few months." "You work hard. You're honest. You've earned respect." Mrs. Chen's expression was firm. "That makes you one of ours, and we don't let people threaten our own." The words settled into Mara's chest, warm and unfamiliar. She'd spent so long believing she had to face everything alone that she'd forgotten what it felt like to have people stand with her. Ethan visited every day, sometimes twice. He brought supplies, taught Mara basic self-defense moves, and maintained a calm presence that helped keep her panic at bay. They couldn't work on the house with this threat hanging over them, but they talked about it anyway, made plans, acted like the future was still something they could count on. One evening, sitting on Mrs. Chen's porch in the cool April air, Ethan took Mara's hand. "When this is over," he said quietly, "I want to marry you, properly, with witnesses and vows and everything that makes it real." Mara's throat tightened. "You don't have to say that just to help my divorce case." "I'm not saying it for the case. I'm saying it because it's true." He turned to face her fully. "I know you're scared. I know you've got every reason to be. But I also know what I want, and I want a life with you. Building that house, working the land, growing old together. What if I can't be what you need? What if the damage is too deep? Then we'll work through it, together." His grip tightened on her hand. "I'm not expecting perfection, Mara. I'm just asking for the chance to try." She looked at their joined hands, at the calluses they both wore from hard work, at the way his fingers fit around hers like they belonged there. "Ask me again," she whispered, "when this is over. When Garrett's gone and I'm free. Ask me then." "I will." Ethan lifted her hand and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. "And I already know what your answer will be." "Do you?" "Yes." His smile was soft. "Because you're not running anymore. You're fighting. And people who fight don't give up on the future." 3 weeks passed. Judge Thornton filed Mara's divorce petition, citing abandonment and cruelty. A notice was sent to Garrett's last known address in St. Louis, informing him of the proceedings. There was no response. The waiting was its own kind of torture. Every time Mara heard horses on the street, her heart would lurch. Every stranger in town made her scan faces, looking for the one she dreaded. Sleep became difficult. Appetite disappeared. She lost weight she couldn't afford to lose. Ethan noticed, of course. He started bringing food to her at work, making sure she ate. He'd sit with her in the evenings, not talking, just being present. His steadiness became her anchor. Then, on a Thursday afternoon in late April, Garrett Holloway rode into Red Bluff. Mara was at the general store when she saw him through the window. She'd know that posture anywhere, the way he sat his horse like he owned the world, the tilt of his hat, the set of his shoulders. Her blood turned to ice. She must have made a sound because Mr. Peterson, the store owner, looked at her sharply. "That him?" he asked. Mara could only nod. "Stay here. I'll get the marshal." But Garrett had already spotted her through the window. He dismounted and tied his horse to the rail, then walked toward the store with purposeful strides. Mara backed away from the window, her heart hammering. She was trapped. The only exit was the front door, and Garrett was heading straight for it. The door opened. Garrett stepped inside. He looked older than she remembered, harder. There were lines around his mouth that hadn't been there before, and his eyes had a cold gleam that made her stomach turn. "Mara," he said, his voice smooth as oil. "There you are. I've been looking everywhere for you." "Get out." Her voice shook but held. "That's no way to greet your husband." He took a step closer. "We need to talk." "We have nothing to talk about." "I disagree. You ran away from our marriage. left me to deal with the creditors alone. That wasn't very loyal of you. You gambled away everything we had. You left me no choice." Garrett's expression hardened. "You had a choice. You chose wrong. But I'm willing to forgive you. Come back to St. Louis with me. We'll start over." "I filed for divorce. I'm not coming anywhere with you." "Divorce?" He laughed, the sound ugly. "You think some frontier judge can dissolve our marriage? We made vows, Mara, before witnesses. Those vows are binding. Not when you break them every day by hurting me." His eyes flashed dangerously. "I never hurt you. I corrected you. There's a difference. You were always too headstrong, too willful. Someone had to teach you your place." Mara felt rage rise up, hot and fierce, burning away the fear. "My place is not beneath your fists. You're my wife. I'm nothing to you anymore." Garrett moved fast, closing the distance between them in 2 strides. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. "You're mine. You'll always be mine. And you're coming home if I have to drag you there myself. Let her go." Ethan's voice cut through the store like a blade. He stood in the doorway, his hand resting casually on his gun belt. His expression was calm, but his eyes were pure ice. Garrett's grip on Mara's arm tightened. "This is none of your business, friend. This is between me and my wife." "She's not your wife. She's filed for divorce, and you're assaulting her." Ethan took a step inside. "I said let her go." "Or what?" Garrett sneered. "You'll shoot me? In front of witnesses?" "If I have to." The air in the store went deadly still. Mr. Peterson had disappeared, presumably to fetch Marshal Hawkins, but they were alone for now. Just the 3 of them, and the violence simmering beneath the surface. Garrett studied Ethan, assessing. Then his gaze shifted back to Mara, and understanding dawned. "Him?" He laughed, cruel and mocking. "You left me for this? Some dirt-poor rancher in the middle of nowhere?" "I left you because you're a monster," Mara said, yanking her arm free. "Ethan has nothing to do with it. Doesn't he?" Garrett's expression turned calculating. "I see how it is now. You didn't run from debt. You ran to him. How long were you carrying on behind my back, Mara? How long were you making a fool of me?" "I never met Ethan until after I left St. Louis, and even if I had, it wouldn't excuse what you did to me." "What I did?" Garrett's voice rose. "I gave you everything. A home, a name, respectability, and this is how you repay me? By running off with the first cowboy who shows you attention? You gave me bruises and terror and 3 years of hell," Mara shot back. "That's what you gave me. And I'm not going back to it. Ever." Garrett's hand moved toward his belt. Ethan's gun was out of its holster before Garrett could draw, the barrel pointed steady at his chest. "Don't," Ethan said quietly. "Please don't give me a reason." The door burst open. Marshal Hawkins strode in, shotgun in hand, 2 deputies flanking him. "That's enough," Hawkins barked. "Mr. Holloway, I presume?" Garrett slowly raised his hands, his eyes never leaving Ethan's face. "Marshal, I'm just trying to talk to my wife." "She's not your wife. She's filed for divorce, and I just watched you assault her." Hawkins nodded to his deputies. "Detain him." "On what charge?" Garrett demanded as the deputies moved forward. "Assault, threatening behavior, disturbing the peace. Take your pick." Hawkins looked at Mara. "You all right, Miss Calloway?" Mara nodded, not trusting her voice. The deputies took Garrett by the arms. He didn't resist, but his eyes promised violence as they led him toward the door. "This isn't over, Mara," he called back. "You're still my wife. The law is on my side." "Get him out of here," Hawkins ordered. They dragged Garrett out. His protests echoed down the street, then faded as they presumably reached the jail. Ethan holstered his gun and crossed to Mara in 2 strides. "Are you hurt?" "No, I'm—" Her voice broke. "I'm fine." She wasn't fine. She was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. Ethan pulled her against his chest, and Mara buried her face in his shirt, trying to breathe through the panic. "You're safe," Ethan murmured. "I've got you. You're safe." Hawkins cleared his throat. "I can hold him for a day, maybe 2, but unless you want to press charges, I'll have to let him go." Mara pulled back slightly. "What happens if I press charges?" Trial. You'd have to testify. He'd have the right to defend himself. Could get messy. But he'd be locked up during the trial? If the judge agrees, which he might, given Holloway's threats and the fact that he grabbed you. Hawkins paused. But I gotta warn you, these cases don't always go the way they should. Juries are unpredictable when it comes to marital disputes. I'll testify, Mara said firmly. I'm not running from him anymore. You sure? Ethan asked quietly. She looked up at him. I'm sure. You said we face this together. That means not backing down when it gets hard. Ethan's expression softened. All right, then we fight. They spent the rest of the day giving statements to Marshal Hawkins. By evening, the whole town knew what had happened at the general store. Opinion was split. Some people thought Mara was brave for standing up to her husband. Others muttered that she should have handled it privately, that airing marital problems in public was unseemly. Mara tried not to care what people thought, but that night, lying in bed at the boarding house with her arm throbbing where Garrett had grabbed it, she felt the weight of judgment pressing down on her chest. A soft knock came at her door. Mara, it's Mrs. Chen. Can I come in? Mara sat up. Yes. Mrs. Chen entered carrying a cup of tea and a small jar of salve. She sat on the edge of the bed and handed Mara the tea. Drink this. It'll help you sleep. Mara took a sip. The tea was bitter with herbs she didn't recognize, but it was warm and soothing. Mrs. Chen took Mara's arm gently and examined the bruises already forming. That bastard, she muttered, applying the salve with careful fingers. You did the right thing today, pressing charges. Some people don't think so. Some people are fools. Mrs. Chen's hands were gentle despite her harsh words. You stood up for yourself. That takes more courage than running, more courage than most people have. I'm terrified, Mara admitted. What if the trial doesn't go my way? What if they make me go back to him? They won't. Ethan won't let them. I won't let them. This whole town won't let them. Mrs. Chen finished applying the salve and capped the jar. You're not alone in this, child. The sooner you accept that, the easier it'll get. The words were an echo of what Ethan had been telling her for months. Maybe it was time to start believing them. Mara finished her tea and lay back down. Mrs. Chen tucked the blankets around her like she was a child, then left quietly, locking the door behind her from the outside. The trial was set for 2 weeks later. Judge Thornton agreed to keep Garrett in custody until then, citing the threat he posed to Mara's safety. Garrett's lawyer, a slick man from Cheyenne who'd arrived on the afternoon stage, protested loudly, but Thornton was unmoved. Those 2 weeks were a blur of preparation. Hawkins coached Mara on testimony. Ethan stayed close, a constant protective presence. The town continued to divide itself over the issue, but the people who mattered stood firm in their support. The night before the trial, Ethan took Mara out to the valley. The house foundation had been poured weeks ago, waiting for them to start building. It sat there in the evening light, a promise of what could be. Whatever happens tomorrow, Ethan said, this is still here. We're still building this. Mara looked at the foundation, solid, level, ready to hold weight. What if I lose? You won't. But if I do, then we figure out the next step, together. He turned her to face him. Mara, listen to me. I love you. Not because you're perfect or fearless or because everything's easy with you. I love you because you're real, because you fight even when you're scared, because you chose to stay and face this instead of running. He paused. And no matter what happens in that courtroom tomorrow, that doesn't change. We don't change. Mara felt tears prick her eyes. I don't deserve you. Yes, you do. You deserve everything good in this world, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you believe that. He pulled her close. You're going to win tomorrow. You're going to tell your truth, and people are going to listen. And then you're going to be free. And then we build our house. We get married. We live the life we've been planning. His voice was steady, certain. We win, Mara. One way or another, we win. Standing there with Ethan's arms around her and the foundation solid beneath their feet, Mara let herself believe it, let herself imagine a future where Garrett was nothing but a bad memory, where she was legally free, where she and Ethan could build their life without shadows hanging over them. It was the most dangerous kind of hope, the kind that could destroy you if it didn't come true. But it was also the only kind worth having. The trial began at 9 o'clock the next morning. The courtroom was packed. It seemed like half of Red Bluff had turned out, along with people from neighboring towns who'd heard about the case. Mara sat at the front beside a nervous young lawyer Judge Thornton had appointed to represent her. Garrett sat across the aisle with his expensive lawyer, looking confident and righteous in a new suit someone must have brought him. When he caught Mara's eye, he smiled, cold and possessive. She looked away and found Ethan in the crowd. He nodded once, steady and sure. Mrs. Chen sat beside him, her face set in determined lines. The Millers were there. Mr. Peterson. Even Mrs. Henderson, her people, her community. She wasn't alone. Judge Thornton called the court to order, and the trial began. Garrett's lawyer went first, painting Mara as an ungrateful wife who'd abandoned her husband in his time of need. He talked about the sanctity of marriage vows, about a man's right to expect loyalty from his wife, about how misunderstandings between spouses shouldn't be aired in court. Then it was Mara's turn to testify. She walked to the witness stand on shaking legs. The bailiff swore her in. She sat down and looked at the crowd, at all those watching faces. Her lawyer stood. Miss Calloway, please tell the court about your marriage to Garrett Holloway. Mara took a breath. Then she began to speak. She told them everything. The courtship that had seemed romantic but was really controlling. The wedding that had trapped her. The first time Garrett hit her and swore it would never happen again. The years of walking on eggshells, trying to be perfect, failing because perfection was impossible. She told them about the gambling, the debt, the creditors, about the night she finally realized Garrett would kill her if she stayed, about the money she'd hidden away penny by penny, about running in the dark with nothing but a bag and hope. She told them about the stagecoach crash that had brought her to Red Bluff, about building a new life, about finally finding peace. And she told them about Garrett's letter, about his threats, about the way he'd grabbed her in the store with murder in his eyes. When she finished, the courtroom was silent. Garrett's lawyer stood for cross-examination. He tried to shake her story, tried to make her seem like a liar or a woman scorned. But Mara had lived through too much to be intimidated by legal tactics. Did you love your husband? The lawyer asked. I thought I did. Then I learned what love really was and realized what I felt for him was fear. Did you ever strike him? No, I was too afraid. Did you take money that belonged to him when you left? I took money I'd earned doing laundry and mending for other people. Money I'd hidden because I knew I'd need it to survive. So you planned to leave him? I planned to survive him. There's a difference. The lawyer tried several more angles, but Mara didn't waver. When he finally sat down, looking frustrated, Judge Thornton called for a recess. Ethan met Mara outside the courtroom and pulled her into a fierce embrace. You were incredible, he murmured into her hair. It's not over yet. No, but you told the truth. That matters. The trial resumed after lunch. Garrett took the stand, painting himself as a devoted husband who'd made mistakes but loved his wife. He claimed Mara exaggerated his temper, that any discipline he'd given her was warranted and mild. He admitted to gambling but said it was just bad luck, not addiction. He denied ever threatening her, said the letter was just a husband trying to reconcile with his estranged wife. It was a convincing performance. Mara watched several people in the crowd nodding along. Then her lawyer stood for cross-examination. Mr. Holloway, you say you never threatened your wife, but you wrote that she belonged to you, that you'd drag her back to St. Louis. How is that not a threat? It's a figure of speech. I was upset. You grabbed her arm in the general store hard enough to leave bruises. Is that also a figure of speech? I was trying to talk to her. She was being difficult. So you respond to difficulty with violence? I didn't. Garrett stopped, realizing the trap. It wasn't violence. It was just what? Just correcting her? Isn't that what you said you did when you hit her? Garrett's lawyer objected. The judge sustained it, but the damage was done. When both sides had presented their cases, Judge Thornton declared a recess to consider his verdict. Wyoming Territory didn't use juries for divorce cases. The decision was his alone. The wait was excruciating. Mara sat outside the courthouse with Ethan, holding his hand so tight her fingers ached. Mrs. Chen brought them water. Mr. Peterson offered encouraging words. The town waited together. After 2 hours, the bailiff called them back inside. Judge Thornton sat behind his bench, his expression grave. He looked at Mara, then at Garrett, then down at his notes. This court has heard testimony from both parties regarding the dissolution of their marriage, he began. The law on such matters is complex, and marital disputes are rarely clear-cut. However, in this case, certain facts are not in dispute. Mara's heart hammered. Mr. Holloway admits to gambling away the couple's resources. He admits to grabbing Mrs. Holloway in the general store. And his own letter, entered into evidence, contains language that any reasonable person would interpret as threatening. Thornton looked up. Furthermore, Mrs. Holloway's testimony was credible and consistent. Her account of abuse, while impossible to prove beyond doubt, rings true. Garrett leaned forward, his face reddening. Therefore, Thornton continued, this court grants Mara Calloway's petition for divorce on the grounds of cruelty and abandonment. The marriage is hereby dissolved. Mrs. Calloway is free to resume her maiden name and is under no further obligation to Mr. Holloway. Mara couldn't breathe, couldn't process what she was hearing. Furthermore, the judge said, his voice hardening, Mr. Holloway is hereby ordered to stay at least 100 yards away from Miss Calloway at all times. Any violation of this order will result in immediate arrest. Do you understand, Mr. Holloway? Garrett stood, his chair scraping loudly. This is absurd. She's my wife. She was your wife. She is no longer. And if you approach her again, you'll find yourself in a cell. Thornton's gavel came down. This court is adjourned. The courtroom erupted in noise. People talking, some cheering, others protesting, but Mara heard none of it. She turned to Ethan, who was looking at her with tears in his eyes. You're free, he said. Mara, you're free. And then she was in his arms, crying and laughing at the same time, while the whole town witnessed her joy. She was free. After 3 years of hell, after months of fear, after weeks of terror, she was finally, legally, completely free. Garrett was escorted from the courtroom by the deputies, his face twisted with rage. Mara didn't watch him go. She didn't care where he went or what he did next, as long as it was far away from her. Outside the courthouse, people crowded around to congratulate her. Mrs. Chen hugged her tight. The Millers all took turns celebrating. Even people who'd been skeptical earlier offered kind words. But Mara only had eyes for Ethan. He stood slightly apart from the crowd, waiting. When she reached him, he took her hand. Walk with me? He asked. They walked through town and out toward the valley, leaving the celebration behind. The spring evening was warm, the land green with new growth. Everything felt washed clean, new, possible. When they reached the foundation, Ethan stopped and turned to face her. I said I'd ask you again when this was over, he said, when you were free. Mara's heart began to race. Ethan took both her hands in his. Mara Calloway, will you marry me? Not because you need protection or security or someone to stand between you and the world, but because you want to build a life with me. Because you choose it. Choose us. Mara looked at him, really looked, at this man who'd offered her a ride when she had nothing, who'd given her shelter in the storm, who'd stood beside her when she was ready to run, who'd loved her through all her fear and damage and still saw something worth fighting for. This man who'd helped her remember that she was more than her past, that she deserved more than survival. Yes, she said, her voice strong and clear. Yes, I'll marry you. Ethan's smile was like sunrise. He pulled her close and kissed her, gentle and sweet and full of promise. When they broke apart, Mara rested her forehead against his. I love you, she whispered. I don't think I've said it yet, but I do. I love you. I know. His arms tightened around her. I've known for a while. They stood like that as the sun set over their valley, over the foundation that would become their home, over the life they were choosing to build together. Mara had spent years running from her past, but standing here with Ethan, she finally understood what Mrs. Chen had tried to tell her. Belonging didn't happen by accident. It happened when you stopped running long enough to put down roots. And she was done running. She was finally, beautifully, terrifyingly ready to belong. They were married 3 weeks later in Mrs. Chen's garden, under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. The wedding was small, simple, nothing like the elaborate affair Mara had endured with Garrett. Just the people who mattered, witnesses who'd stood with them through everything. Mrs. Chen had insisted on hosting, decorating her small yard with wildflowers the Miller children had picked. The banker's wife had sewn Mara a new dress in cream-colored linen that caught the light when she moved. Mr. Peterson closed his store for the afternoon so everyone could attend. Mara stood beside Ethan in front of Judge Thornton, who'd agreed to perform the ceremony. Her hand trembled in his, not from fear this time, but from the overwhelming reality of what was happening. She was choosing this, choosing him, choosing a future built on trust instead of terror. "Do you, Ethan Rourke, take this woman to be your wife?" Thornton asked. "I do." Ethan's voice was steady, his eyes never leaving Mara's face. "And do you, Mara Calloway, take this man to be your husband?" Mara felt the weight of every person watching, every hope pinned on this moment. But mostly she felt Ethan's hand solid in hers, anchoring her to this choice. "I do," she said clearly. The words felt different this time. Not a cage closing, but a door opening. "Then by the power vested in me by Wyoming territory, I pronounce you husband and wife." Thornton smiled. "You may kiss your bride." Ethan pulled Mara close and kissed her while the small crowd cheered. When they broke apart, Mara was crying and laughing at the same time, overwhelmed by the simple joy of it all. Mrs. Chen had prepared a feast that must have cost her a fortune. There was roasted chicken and fresh bread, potato salad and greens, and a cake that the seamstress had baked and decorated with careful precision. People ate and talked and celebrated while Mara and Ethan sat together, their hands clasped beneath the table. "You all right?" Ethan murmured. "Better than all right." Mara leaned her head on his shoulder. "I'm happy." The word felt foreign in her mouth. She couldn't remember the last time she'd said it and meant it. But sitting here surrounded by people who'd chosen to care about her, married to a man who saw her as an equal, Mara realized it was true. She was happy. As the sun began to set, Ethan stood and helped Mara to her feet. "We should head out before it gets dark." They were spending their first night as husband and wife at the cabin. It was small and rough, but it was theirs. Tomorrow they'd start the real work of building their life, but tonight was just for them. The guests followed them to the edge of town to see them off. Mrs. Miller pressed a basket of food into Mara's hands. Mrs. Chen gave her a fierce hug and whispered, "Be happy, child. You've earned it." Mara hugged her back. This woman who'd given her shelter when she had nothing, who'd defended her when others judged, who'd become more like family than anyone she'd been born to. Then Ethan helped her onto his horse, and they rode out into the deepening twilight, toward the valley and the cabin and their future. The cabin looked different in the fading light, softer somehow. Ethan had cleaned it thoroughly, brought in fresh blankets, even put wildflowers in a jar on the table. It was still just one room with rough walls and a dirt floor, but it was theirs. "It's not much," Ethan said, suddenly nervous. "But once we get the house built—" Mara silenced him with a kiss. "It's perfect." And somehow, it was. Not because of what it looked like, but because of what it represented. A place they'd chosen together, a starting point for everything that would come next. They spent that night learning each other in the darkness, gentle and careful and real. Mara had been afraid this part would bring back memories of Garrett, of violation and pain. But Ethan's touch was nothing like that. He asked permission with every movement, stopped when she tensed, waited until she relaxed again. This was what intimacy was supposed to be. A conversation, not a conquest. Partnership, not power. Afterward, lying wrapped in Ethan's arms, Mara felt something fundamental shift inside her. The last piece of Garrett's hold on her crumbled away. Her body was her own again. Her choices were her own. Her life was her own. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. Ethan's arms tightened around her. "I love you too." They fell asleep like that, tangled together, safe. Morning came with birdsong and sunlight streaming through the cabin window. Mara woke to find Ethan already up, building a fire for coffee. He looked over when he heard her stirring and smiled. "Morning, Mrs. Rourke?" The name sent a thrill through her. Not because it meant she belonged to him, but because it meant they belonged to each other. "Morning, Mr. Rourke." They had breakfast together, then rode out to the valley to look at the foundation. The sight of it made Mara's breath catch. This was real. They were really doing this. I was thinking, Ethan said, studying the marked ground, we should start with the frame this week. I've got enough lumber ordered to get the basic structure up. If we work steady, we could have walls by midsummer. And a roof by fall, Mara added, already calculating in her head. We'll need help, though. The frame's too big for just 2 people. I've got some friends who offered, and Mr. Peterson said his son would help in exchange for learning the trade. They spent the morning planning, sketching adjustments, arguing good-naturedly about window placement and door width. It felt natural, this collaboration, like they'd been building together for years instead of months. By afternoon, they were both covered in dust and sweat, but the plans were solid. They had a vision, a timeline, and the determination to see it through. We're really doing this, Mara said, looking at their sketches. We really are. Ethan pulled her close. Building something that'll last. The first timber went up on a Tuesday morning in late May. Ethan's friends arrived at dawn. 3 ranchers from neighboring properties, Mr. Peterson's son Tom, and even Marshall Hawkins, who'd taken a day off to help. The Millers sent their oldest boy to assist, eager to learn. Mara worked alongside them, measuring and marking, calling out adjustments, her father's teachings coming back to her like muscle memory. The men initially seemed surprised that she knew what she was doing, but by midday they were deferring to her expertise on structural questions. How do you know so much about framing? Tom asked during a water break. My father was a builder. He taught me young. Mara wiped sweat from her forehead. Always said good building was about understanding how weight moves through a structure, where the stress points are. Most women don't know this kind of thing. Most women aren't given the chance to learn. She handed him back the water jug. Doesn't mean they couldn't if someone taught them. By evening, the main support posts were set and braced. It didn't look like much yet, just wooden bones reaching toward the sky. But Mara could see what it would become. Could imagine the walls filling in the spaces, the roof closing them in, the windows letting in light. Home. It was going to be home. The work continued through June. Every day brought new progress. Wall frames going up, window openings taking shape, the structure slowly transforming from plan to reality. Mara and Ethan fell into a rhythm of labor, working side by side in the heat and dust, learning each other's strengths and compensating for weaknesses. Ethan was patient and methodical, never rushing even when Mara wanted to push faster. Mara was precise and exacting, catching mistakes before they became structural problems. Together they made a solid team. The town took notice. People would ride out to watch the progress, offer advice, bring food and cold drinks. The house became a kind of community project. Everyone invested in seeing it completed. Men would stop by after their own work to hammer in a few nails. Women would bring meals so Mara and Ethan didn't have to stop to cook. It was the kind of support Mara had never experienced before. In St. Louis, she'd been isolated, cut off from friends and family by Garrett's jealousy. Here, she was surrounded by people who wanted to see her succeed. This is what it means to belong somewhere, Mrs. Chen said one evening, watching the sunset from the partially completed porch. Not just living in a place, but being woven into its fabric. Mara nodded, understanding. She wasn't just building a house. She was building a life, connections, a future that was rooted in something solid. July brought scorching heat that made the work brutal. They started early, working through the cool morning hours, then resting during the worst of the afternoon heat before resuming in the evening. Progress slowed, but never stopped. One afternoon, taking shelter from the sun under a tarp they'd strung up, Ethan showed Mara something he'd been carving in the evenings, a small wooden box with their initials intertwined on the lid. For you, he said, handing it over. Thought you might want somewhere to keep important things. Mara ran her fingers over the smooth wood, over the careful carving. It's beautiful. Not as beautiful as you. Ethan's voice was soft. I watch you working on this house, covered in sawdust, hair falling out of its pins, yelling at me when I cut a board wrong, and I think this is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Mara felt tears prick her eyes. You're going to make me cry. Good tears? The best kind. She leaned over and kissed him, not caring that they were both sweaty and covered in grime. This was real. This was life. This was what love looked like when it was built on truth instead of illusion. By late August, the roof was on and the walls were up. Windows had been installed, bought with money Ethan had saved over the past year. The front door, solid oak that Ethan had ordered specially, hung straight and true in its frame. They still needed to finish the interior, install the stove, build furniture. But the house was weatherproof and livable. They could move in. The town threw them a housewarming party before they'd even moved their belongings. People brought gifts, blankets and dishes, tools and preserves, small luxuries that would make the house a home. Mrs. Chen gave them curtains she'd sewn herself. The Millers brought a rocking chair Mr. Miller had built. Even Marshal Hawkins contributed a shotgun for protection, though Mara suspected they wouldn't need it. "You've built something good here," Hawkins said, surveying the house. "Something worth protecting." "We built it together," Mara corrected. "All of us." And it was true. This house wasn't just hers and Ethan's. It was proof of what a community could do when it chose to support instead of tear down. They moved in on a Saturday in early September. It took multiple trips to transport everything from the cabin to the new house, their clothes, Ethan's tools, the few pieces of furniture they owned. But by evening, they were settled. Mara stood in the main room, looking around at the space they'd created, the kitchen area with its new stove, the bedroom with the bed Ethan had built, the second bedroom they'd left empty for now, a placeholder for future possibilities. "What do you think?" Ethan asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "I think we did it." Mara leaned back against him. "We actually did it." "We did." He kissed the top of her head. "And now we get to live in it." That night, they christened their new home properly, making love in their own bed in their own house on their own land. Afterward, lying tangled in the sheets, Mara felt a peace she'd never known before. This was home. Not because of the walls around her, but because of the man beside her, because of the choice they'd made to build this life together. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For not giving up on me. For being patient. For seeing something in me worth fighting for." Ethan turned to face her in the darkness. "You were always worth fighting for, Mara. You just needed time to see it yourself." Fall arrived with a vengeance, bringing early frost and the threat of winter. Mara and Ethan worked to prepare, cutting firewood and stocking supplies, making sure the house could withstand the harsh months ahead. On a particularly cold October morning, Mara woke feeling strange, nauseous and dizzy in a way that had nothing to do with illness. She made it outside before vomiting into the grass, then sat back on her heels, breathing hard. Understanding dawned slowly, terrifyingly. She was pregnant. The realization sent a wave of panic through her. She wasn't ready for this. Didn't know if she could be a mother after everything she'd been through. What if she failed? What if she damaged her child the way she'd been damaged? But underneath the fear was something else, something that felt almost like hope. She waited until evening to tell Ethan. They were sitting on the porch, watching the sunset paint the valley in shades of gold and crimson. "I'm pregnant," she said quietly. Ethan went very still. Then he turned to look at her, his eyes wide. "Are you sure?" "Pretty sure. I've been sick every morning for the past week. How do you feel about it?" Trust Ethan to ask the important question first, not celebrating immediately, not making assumptions, just wanting to know what she felt. "Terrified," Mara admitted. "But also, maybe a little happy? Just a little? I don't know how to be a mother, Ethan. I don't know if I'm capable of—" "You're capable of anything." He took her hand. "Look at everything you've already done. Survived an abusive marriage, escaped with nothing, built a new life from scratch. You're the strongest person I know. Being strong doesn't mean I'll be a good mother. No, but being honest does. Being willing to love does. Being brave enough to try does." He pulled her close. "And you've got all of that in spades." Mara let herself lean into him, drawing strength from his certainty. "We're really having a baby. We really are." His hand moved to rest on her still flat stomach. "We're building a family." The word settled into Mara's chest, warm and solid. Family. Not the family she'd been born into, which had scattered and broken. Not the twisted mockery Garrett had tried to force on her, but a real family built on choice and love and partnership. "I'm scared," she whispered. "Me too." Ethan's voice was honest. "But we'll figure it out together, just like we figured out everything else." Winter came hard and fast that year. By November, snow had buried the valley under 3 feet of white. Mara and Ethan settled into the rhythms of hibernation, spending long evenings by the fire while the wind howled outside. Mara's pregnancy progressed. The sickness faded, replaced by a constant tiredness and a slowly expanding belly. Ethan was endlessly patient, taking over the heavier chores, making sure she rested, treating her like she was something precious. "I'm not fragile," she protested one evening when he insisted she sit while he made dinner. "I know, you're the least fragile person I've ever met." He stirred the pot on the stove. "But you're also growing a human being. That takes energy. Let me help." "You already help with everything." "That's what marriage is. Helping each other, taking turns carrying the weight." He looked at her seriously. "You carried everything alone for too long, Mara. Let me carry some of it now." She did. Slowly, painfully, she learned to accept help without feeling weak. Learned that leaning on someone didn't make you less strong, just less alone. Christmas came again, their first in the new house. They invited Mrs. Chen and the Millers for dinner, cramming everyone into their small space with laughter and chaos. The children were fascinated by Mara's growing belly, asking endless questions about the baby. "Will it be a boy or a girl?" one of the Miller boys asked. "We won't know until it arrives," Mara said. "What will you name it?" She and Ethan exchanged glances. They'd been avoiding that conversation, both superstitious about making plans too far in advance. "We haven't decided yet," Ethan said diplomatically. After everyone left, Mara and Ethan sat by the fire, exhausted but happy. "We should talk about names," Ethan said quietly. "I know. If it's a girl, I'd like to name her Sarah, after my first wife. If that's all right with you." The request could have hurt, could have felt like a rejection, like he was trying to recreate what he'd lost. But Mara understood. Sarah had been part of his life, part of who he was. Pretending she'd never existed wouldn't honor anyone. "I think that's beautiful," Mara said. "And if it's a boy?" "I was thinking Thomas, after your father." Mara's throat tightened. She'd told Ethan stories about her father over the long winter evenings, about the man who'd taught her to build, who died when she was barely 16. Hearing his name now, offered as a gift, made her eyes burn with tears. "Thomas Rourke," she said softly. "I like that." Sarah or Thomas Rourke. Ethan's hand found hers. Either way, they'll be loved. The baby came on a warm April morning, arriving 3 weeks earlier than expected. Mara woke to pain rippling through her belly and knew immediately what was happening. "Ethan," she gasped. "It's time." He was out of bed instantly, pulling on clothes, his face pale. "I'll get Mrs. Chen and the midwife. Don't move." "I don't think I could if I tried." He rode like hell into town, returning with Mrs. Chen and the midwife in record time. The older women took over with calm efficiency, boiling water and preparing the bedroom while Ethan paced the main room like a caged animal. Labor was long and brutal. Mara had survived a lot in her life, but nothing prepared her for the sheer intensity of bringing a child into the world. Pain rolled through her in waves, each one stronger than the last, until she thought she might break apart from it. But Mrs. Chen held one hand and the midwife coached her through each contraction, and somehow Mara endured. Finally, after hours that felt like days, the midwife said, "One more push." Mara bore down with the last of her strength, and suddenly the room filled with the sound of crying, high and angry and absolutely perfect. "It's a girl," the midwife announced, placing the tiny squalling baby on Mara's chest. Mara looked down at her daughter and felt her entire world shift. This small creature, red-faced and furious, had just rewritten every truth she'd ever known about herself. She was a mother, and somehow, impossibly, she already knew she would die to protect this tiny life. "Can I come in?" Ethan's voice from the doorway was tentative. "Come meet your daughter," Mara said, her voice thick with tears. Ethan crossed to the bed and looked down at the baby. His face transformed, awe and love and fear mixing together. "She's perfect," he whispered. "She's Sarah," Mara said. "Sarah Rourke." Ethan's eyes met hers, shining with tears. "Hello, Sarah. Welcome home." The baby quieted at the sound of his voice, her tiny fist curling around Mara's finger. In that moment, Mara understood something fundamental. This was what she'd been running toward all along. Not away from pain, but toward this, toward love, toward family, toward a life worth living. The years that followed were hard but good. Sarah grew into a wild, fearless child who loved the land as much as her parents did. Mara and Ethan worked the valley together, building slowly and steadily. A barn, corrals, a small orchard that struggled but eventually took root. 2 more children came. Thomas, as they'd planned, arrived when Sarah was 3. Then another girl, Grace, completed their family when Thomas was 2. The house expanded with them. Ethan added a room for the children, then another for storage. The original structure held strong, just as Mara had designed it, bearing the weight of their growing life. Mara never forgot what she'd survived to get here. The scars Garrett left never fully disappeared. There were still nights when nightmares woke her, still moments when loud voices or sudden movements made her flinch. But Ethan was always there, patient and understanding, helping her through the rough patches. And the children helped too. Being responsible for their safety, their happiness, their understanding of what love should look like. It forced Mara to keep healing, to keep choosing courage over fear. She taught them all to build. Sarah took to it naturally, understanding structures and balance like she'd been born knowing. Thomas was more interested in the land itself, in planting and growing. Grace, the youngest, had a wild imagination that saw possibilities in everything. The town of Red Bluff grew around them. New families arrived, old ones left, but the core remained. Mrs. Chen, the Millers, Marshall Hawkins, all the people who'd stood with Mara when she'd needed it most. Mrs. Chen lived long enough to see all 3 children born, bouncing each on her knee and muttering in Chinese about how beautiful they were. When she died peacefully in her sleep at 73, the whole town mourned. Mara wept for days, grateful that this woman had been in her life, had shown her what real family looked like. On a warm summer evening when Sarah was 12, Thomas 9, and Grace 7, the family sat on their porch watching the sunset. The children were arguing good-naturedly about something inconsequential. Ethan had his arm around Mara's shoulders. The valley spread out before them, golden in the fading light. "Do you ever regret it?" Ethan asked quietly, pitched low enough that only Mara could hear. "Regret what?" "Staying, choosing this life instead of running." Mara looked at her children, at the house they'd built, at the land they'd claimed. She thought about the terrified woman who'd climbed onto Ethan's horse all those years ago, certain she'd never be able to trust anyone again. "Not for a single second," she said. "Even the hard parts?" "Especially the hard parts." She turned to look at him. "The hard parts taught me I was stronger than I thought, that I deserved more than survival, that love doesn't have to hurt." Ethan pulled her closer. "I love you, Mara Rourke. I love you too." They sat in comfortable silence while the children played and the sun finished its descent. This was her life now. Not perfect, nothing ever was, but real and hard-earned and absolutely hers. She'd stopped running, stopped surviving, stopped letting fear make her decisions. Instead, she'd chosen to build, to love, to belong. And in the end, that choice had made all the difference. Years later, when Mara was old and her children were grown with families of their own, she would sit on that same porch and watch the sun set over the valley. The house had weathered countless storms, just as they'd designed it to. The land had yielded crops and livestock, supported generations. Ethan sat beside her, his hair white now, his hands gnarled with age but still strong. They'd built a life that had lasted, a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. "We did good," Ethan said one evening, his voice rough with age. "We did," Mara agreed. "We really did." That night, Mara dreamed of the stagecoach crash that had brought her to Wyoming territory all those years ago. But this time, when she hit the ground, she didn't feel fear. She felt anticipation, because she knew what was coming. the shadow on the horizon, the quiet offer, the choice that would change everything. She knew she'd say yes to the ride, yes to the storm, yes to the possibility of something more than survival. And she knew that choice would lead her here, to this porch, this man, this life, to home. When Mara passed away at 76, peacefully in her sleep with Ethan holding her hand, the entire territory mourned. But her children didn't grieve for long. How could they, when she'd left them such a gift? She'd shown them what it meant to survive the unsurvivable, to rebuild after destruction, to choose love over fear again and again, no matter how terrifying it seemed. The house still stands in that valley, weathered but solid. Sarah's grandchildren live there now, the fifth generation to call it home. They know the story of how it was built, piece by piece, by a woman who'd lost everything, and a man who saw her worth when she couldn't see it herself. They know about the foundation, poured with precision, about the frame, raised with determination, about the walls that went up slowly, carefully, built to last. But mostly they know about the love that filled those walls, the choice that made them a home instead of just a house. And on quiet evenings, when the wind whispers through the valley, they swear they can still hear it, the sound of two people building something that time couldn't take away. Something that started with a broken stagecoach wheel and a stranger's kindness and a terrified woman who found the courage to stop running. Something that became a life, a family, a legacy. Something that became everything.